Hey guys, how are you all? Today we will see what if Naruto stuck in Kyuubi body. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. The village hidden in the leaves. The military capital of the most powerful nation in the world, the land of fire. Born from peace, flourishing in war, and rebounding from tragedy after tragedy. The world was cruel to the way of the shinobi, and, by association, cruel to the leaf. Inner turmoil, outer turmoil. Environmental turmoil. Turmoil that stood the test of time, even after countless societal victories. In the beginning, there was Madara Uchiha. Then, there was the triumvirate of despicable shinobi wars. Then, there was the Nine Tails attack. Then, there was the Uchiha massacre. Then, there was the Konoha crush. And then, Tsunade sighed and closed her eyes, breaking her chain of thought at the base, forcing it to come crashing down to the depths of despondency and despair that was her inner being. With a manicured hand, she ran her hair back across her neck and out of her face as she leaned forward in her desk chair and began her daily work. It was no surprise that the village's strife became her own once she became the 5th Hokage. Her old sensei and father figure, Hiruzen Sarutobi, always said as much. Then again, he had held the job for decades, nearly as long as she had been alive. To say that the man wasn't influential in the development of the leaf into the superpower that it was today would be slanderous to the name of the god of shinobi himself. Despite her inner doubts, she had accepted the job at the news of the third's passing, nearly 3.5 years prior. Granted, it took some convincing from a pair of rather troublesome shinobi. A pair that had become a rather insufferable thorn in her side the instant she laid her eyes upon them in that dusty old bar in the boonies of the Land of Fire. There they found her drinking away her troubles, and living a life of selfish indulgence in an attempt to drown out the voice in the back of her head that loudly criticized her and her actions. She had loudly, and drunkenly, announced that the job of village leader was a fool's errand, and quickly found herself at the receiving end of a rather vivacious blonde's glare. Her pen stopped its robotic movement across the signature line of the document she was currently traipsing through, held in an iron grip that shook and quaked like the flood of emotions that just ran through her mind. Fuck this, she spat to no one in particular, and propelled the helpless pen across the room, where it embedded itself rather explosively into the door of her office. She threw her chair back in a violent frenzy, her heeled sandals click-clacking at the regained contact with the floor. With one sweeping movement, the bottom right drawer in her desk flew open, revealing a tall beige bottle and another stack of ever-ubiquitous paper. The bottle's top was tossed aside with a quickness not seen since the fourth, and Tsunade's red-tinted lips were already working their way through the first half of the liquid when she arrived at the far window of her office. She grimaced, primarily because of the taste of the sake as it worked its way down her throat, but also because of the disheveled woman that stared back at her through the faint reflection in the sweeping glass. Long, blonde hair was frazzled and askew. Deep, dark bags under her eyes gave away just how little sleep she had gotten the previous night. Her skin was pale and lifeless, a stark contrast to the vibrant red lipstick she had slammed across her face before stumbling down the street in a pre-dawn haste to get to work. She crossed her arms across her chest, bottle held gingerly in her right hand, and sighed again. Her outfit, the same thing she wore every day, was the same from yesterday. The food stain on her pale gray sleeveless blouse, and the subtle rip that ran down her forest green houri on the right side were evidence enough. She scowled and fumbled with it absent-mindedly as her eyes glossed over, vision now focused on the village center below her. The early morning rays of sunshine were beginning to peek over the tops of the massive forest that girdled the village, casting massive shadows across the streets and buildings in a conquering darkness. Still, despite the lack of sunlight and the brisk chill that hung in the early autumn air, villagers were beginning to stir along the gravel pathways and go about their daily business. Shopkeepers were assembling their merchandise along the city streets, carpenters were gathering their supplies and materials to begin their construction work, shinobi were beginning to trickle out of the darkness sleepily and approach the Hokage Tower for their day's missions. And then, like the violently beautiful opening of a symphony, sunlight exploded across the leaf, basking Tsunade in a warm and bright glow. She flinched and growled, covering her hungover eyes with her bottle-wielding hand. With another effervescent chug, Tsunade polished off the bottle and gracelessly allowed it to drop from her fingertips onto the wooden floor with a rattling crash. Her eyes shifted to the massive monument that ran across the left half of the window on their own accord, much to her displeasure. The figures of her late grandfather and granduncle, as well as her sensei, stared back at her unmovingly, as if to mock her meager troubles. She shook her head in an attempt to force their judging faces out of her mind, but that only served to exasperate her steadily growing headache. She groaned in displeasure, before collapsing against the window frame behind her desk and looking off at the front of her office, rubbing her temples tenderly. The pen was still stuck through the door unwaveringly, and splintered bits of wood from the impact crater littered the surrounding floor. A few small paintings of nothing too sentimental in particular lined the walls, and a decent-sized bookshelf was leaned up against the beige wall to her left. As she began to right herself once again and head out of her office in search of more alcohol, a soft tapping echoed through the quiet office. With a confused scowl, Tsunade turned on her heels towards the source of the strange sound, and was greeted by a small dark shadow dancing across the glass, obscured by the rays of the sun as they blitzed past and into the bowels of her workplace. "What now?" she grumbled as she took the steps necessary to make her way to the window. With an exasperated sigh, she fumbled with the window's latch until it unclasped, and the large brown messenger hawk hopped through the opening, eager to deliver its payload. Tsunade shook her head as she opened the small container attached to the predator's leg, and removed its contents, a small scroll. "Why the hell don't these damn things ever go to the messenger tower first, instead of here?" she mumbled under her breath, as she made her way back over to her desk, ignoring the bird's hungry and questioning gaze. With a small plop, she slammed back into her office chair with the grace of someone much less sophisticated than herself, and unraveled the scroll with a massive yawn. The Hokage's eyes began to graze through the kanji, one by one, soaking in the information. Her eyes shot open, mouth still open from her instantly stopped yawn. The scroll clattered to the ground from between her outstretched fingers, glancing off the side of her desk as it fell. "Oh no, what do you mean the case cage has been captured?" gaped Sakura. "Gaara's missing?" The pink-haired Kunoichi ran her fingers through her hair as she took a step back, head shaking all the while. "That's impossible. Gaara is, well, Gaara. He wouldn't let something like that happen." A single slate gray eye followed her as she began to pace around the crowded office. "You know as well as I do, Sakura, that Gaara is powerful but not unstoppable." Kakashi turned his shrouded head back towards the Hokage's desk, where Tsunade sat, unmoving. He nonchalantly adjusted his forest green Junin flak jacket across his chest, then returned to his trademark slumped posture, hands barely attempting to nestle themselves in the black pockets of his shinobi pants. "I take it there is more information, Lady Tsunade?" She grunted in affirmation, steepling her fingers atop her workspace, disregarding the plethora of paper that was beginning to pile up just from an hour or so of her ignoring it. According to the message, he was taken by a pair of interesting men. She turned and looked Kakashi right in the eye. They said that the men wore matching black cloaks with red clouds on them. She smirked humorlessly and turned her attention to another man in the room. "Sound familiar?" "Indeed," replied Guy with a frown. "Akatsuki." Tsunade only nodded with a frown of her own. "So it would seem. Sensei," a tall, black-haired boy inquired from the back of the room. His cream-colored kimono shined almost as brightly as his pale white skin and emotionless steel eyes. "Do you know of these Akatsuki?" Guy frowned, his ridiculously large eyebrows flickering in anxiety, as he looked apprehensively at the Hokage before him. She sighed and nodded. "We might as well tell them, if you are going to be going after Gaara." With a subtle motion, she flicked through the stack of papers to her right and retrieved a small yellow folder stamped, "Top Secret," across the top in big, red kanji. She tossed it down on the table before her, and it split open like a cracked egg, revealing a multitude of grainy photographs, mission reports, and other things. For the last 3 months, Guy began with an air of seriousness about him that was quite out of character for him. "I have been assigned on several extended S-ranked espionage and reconnaissance missions throughout the northern part of the Land of Fire. My target," he paused as he began to walk across the room with his arms crossed over his green spandex-clad chest. When he arrived at Tsunade's desk, he plucked the picture she was holding out for him, and turned to show it to his students, has been the organization known as the Akatsuki. Neji narrowed his pupilless eyes as he observed the photograph with slight curiosity. His teammate and rival, a boy that looked to be the spitting image of their sensei, down to the black, bowl-cut hair and everything, ogled at it from beside him. I see. This is why we have been partaking in much more individual training than usual. Indeed, Guy said with a small smile. I have asked Kakashi to observe your work effort and he has told me that you three are doing a most splendid job. One thumbs up and cheeky grin later, he was back to business. Before returning the photograph to the file it came from, he gave it another once-over himself. Two fuzzy figures were seen walking down a gravel pathway in what looked to be the forests to the north. One was tall and muscular, with a large bandaged object slung over his shoulder. The other was also tall, albeit not quite as much, and rather lanky looking. They both had jet black hair that peeked over their large collared black cloaks, the taller one with a more modest cut, the other with a long, silky ponytail that ran down the back of his neck and over the back of his robes. And then, there were the red clouds, peeking through the ink of the photograph like spilled blood. They speckled across the black cloaks almost haphazardly, but with a sense of organized chaos. They were disturbingly beautiful. Shaking his head, Guy turned and placed the photograph back in the folder, which Tsunade snapped shut immediately and stuck in one of the endlessly stuffed drawers of her desk. The Akatsuki, she began, are an organization of S-class missing nin from villages all across the elemental nations. They've been increasingly active the past few years, to the point where they are coming out of their nests in the ground regularly to stir trouble among the Big Five. She sighed, and crossed her arms in front of her as she leaned back in her chair, observing the congregation of shinobi before her. There was Kakashi and Guy to the left, each wearing expressions of boredom and determination, respectively. The tall, silver-haired shinobi raised an eyebrow at her sweeping gaze, before pulling out a small orange book and indulging himself. His mouth and most of his nose were covered completely by a black, cloth face mask, and his left eye was obscured from view by his leaf headband, which was tilted off-center on his forehead. Guy, on the other hand, was a much more bombastic individual than his self-proclaimed, eternal rival. He wore a vibrant green unitard that ran across his body like a sickness, and was covered abruptly from his knees down by neon orange leg warmers that bunched up at his ankles. A traditional green Junin jacket across his chest dulled the visual pain significantly, slightly blocking the view of the leaf headband that was wrapped around his waist like a belt. He was still definitely something, that much was certain. Down the line was Neji Hyuga, a prodigy in his own right and the first among his graduating class to be promoted to full Junin. He watched her intently as well, arms gracefully at his side, ready to go at a moment's notice. And then there was Lee. Lee was like the spitting image of his sensei, for good reason. The boy had taken Guy on as a surrogate father, a role that the taijutsu master had readily accepted and flourished in. To show the pride he had for himself and his adopted guardian, Lee wore a matching green spandex outfit and flak jacket. He additionally wore a series of bandages across his lower arms and over his hands, leaving only the very tips of his fingers exposed. But the most prominent feature of the taijutsu prodigy was his eyes. They were round and bowl-shaped, girdled by eyebrows so massive in size they gave guys a run for their money. His hair was cut in exactly the same way and shape as his sensei's as well, and he, too, bore a determined and excited gleam in his eyes. Sakura stood a good deal away from Lee, closer to Tsunade's desk than the rest. Her pink shoulder-length hair was frazzled and askew, indicating that she ran here immediately upon receiving her summons. A vibrant red-pink jacket was zipped up her front, matched with a pair of skin-tight ash-gray shinobi shorts that held her medical supplies and a small tanto on her right hip. She was still pacing back and forth, a speculative look on her face all the while. And finally, Hinata, the heiress to the mighty Hyuga clan. She was standing uncertainly to the side, not facing anyone in particular, and held her hands together at her waist in worry and fear. Fear for Gaara, fear for her friends, and fear for herself, Tsunade hypothesized. Her big bulky cream-colored jacket glowed warmly from the far side of her rather drab and depressing office. Tsunade smirked inwardly, realizing just how metaphorical the scene looked. The girl was a bastion of light amongst the darkness the Hyuga had fallen into the past decade or so since her mother's death. And it seemed that no one, not even Hinata herself, realized just how important this girl was. Her fearlessly kind attitude was an insurmountable asset, not weakness. Mostly, though, she looked sad. The small spark in her eye that Tsunade always secretly admired was gone currently, and the way she held herself, albeit professional, was pained. She could tell that Hinata was having difficulty keeping up appearances in front of the group. Something was definitely amiss. Tsunade sighed, filing that away for future confrontation. Her father would be getting an earful, no doubt. But regardless, she had a job to do, and an ally to save. What do they want with Gaara? Sakura suddenly asked with a raised eyebrow. Sure, he's the case cage, but wouldn't they just execute him if they wanted him out of his seat? The Akatsuki are after Jinchuriki. Do you remember what happened during your first Chunin exams? The pink-haired girl cringed visibly at the mention of her past, when Team 7 was still intact. Yes, sensei, I do. Kakashi mumbled in affirmation, before continuing. Gaara is the Jinchuriki for the One Tails. Like how Naruto was the Jinchuriki for the Nine Tails. They need him alive in order to do whatever it is they do, I'm assuming. But, Sakura grimaced again, but struggled through in order to get her question answered. What about the Nine Tails? What happens whenever the Jinchuriki dies? Kakashi finished for her bluntly, aware of the discomfort she was amassing at even just a passing mention of her former teammate. She nodded, eyes shifting to the floor. We don't know, honestly. I've heard rumors, but, he scratched the back of his neck with an apprehensive eye smile. I don't want to jump to conclusions just yet. Tsunade watched the procession between student and teacher as the knot of guilt began to build up in her system. Finally, it burst, and she winced visibly, desperate to move around again. With one swift motion, Tsunade sent her chair jettisoning backwards into the wall again, standing fiercely and cracking her knuckles at her sides. Alright, here's the plan. Kakashi, I want you to lead the team to the sand. Gather as much intelligence as you can on the enemy. I'll brief you all on what I know so far, but I'll admit, it isn't much. She turned and walked towards her favorite haunt, the window farthest from the Hokage monument. The room of shinobi simply followed her with their eyes, otherwise not moving at all. Then, I want you to go after these bastards. They think they can run around the world and just wreak havoc on whatever the hell they want? She turned and glared at them. Not on my watch. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the room, and Tsunade nodded with a sly smile. Alright then. Glad we're all on the same page. Now, about these perpetrators. According to the scroll I received this morning, the two Akatsuki members that attacked are unknown to us. She began to walk back to her desk, a scowl on her face. One was short and stout, like a boulder. She shook her head at the confused looks she was getting. Not my words. I find it a bit too cryptic myself. She leaned forward onto her desk, palms outstretched on the wooden surface, still standing. He was only seen as the pair left the village. But rumor has it that he had a bunch of sleeper agents poised across the village, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Therefore, it's safe to assume that whoever he is, he operates primarily in the shadows. She shook her head absent-mindedly, then continued. Now, the second Akatsuki member is the most concerning to me. Why is that, Lady Tsunade? Came the voice of her assistant, Shizune, from behind her. Because, she growled, he looks to be no more than 13 or 14 years old at the most, had vibrant orange hair, rather tattered clothes, and his skin glowed, apparently. And from the report said, he just waltzed into the village without a care in the world, and attacked Gaara directly from his office. A twirl of her wrist in the air amplified her emphasis on the word, waltzed. 13 or 14? Sakura repeated with a frown. Are they really that honorless, that they recruit children? The Akatsuki are monsters, Guy stated solemnly from behind her. She blinked and turned to look at him, surprised by the amount of trepidation he was sporting on his brow. They're hardly human, certainly not youthful, by any sense of the definition. Then we must tackle this opponent head-on. They can do nothing in the face of our unwavering determination. Cheered Lee from the side. Always the optimist, grumbled Tsunade, as she pulled her chair back into place from behind her and threw herself into it gracelessly. Regardless of how you do it, I want you to rescue Gaara. He is a great ally, and a friend to the Leaf. Do whatever you have to do. Kakashi is in charge, like I said, she stated, with a pointed glance at the copy nin, so do what he says. Move out as soon as possible. Kakashi murmured in affirmation, before turning to his squad with a serious aura. Pack your things and meet me at the front gates in 15 minutes. Pack lightly, but for a 3-day trip. Bring enough water for 5. He turned to Guy. I want you to send a message back to the sand and let them know we're on our way. Good idea, Tsunade quipped. I'll have Shizune do that instead. You can go on ahead with your mission. We'll take care of the rest. Kakashi merrily nodded as Shizune scuttled out of the room, her black and blue kimono fluttering behind her as she went. Alright then, if that is all, you're dismissed, the Hokage stated simply, crossing her arms in front of her chest and closing her eyes, sinking down into her chair like a child at the dinner table. Then, a thought came into her mind. Wait, Hinata, could you stay for a moment? I'd like a word in private. The Case Cage Rescue Squad paused momentarily, then shrugged and continued after hearing the Hokage summon their as of now completely silent companion. Yes, Lady Hokage. With the scurrying of feet, and the click of a doorknob, the two kunoichi were alone. Tsunade was still sitting at her desk with her eyes loosely shut, and Hinata turned and approached her hesitantly. Is something the matter, Lady Hokage? She finally asked timidly, after Tsunade simply sat there motionless for an uncomfortable amount of time. Hinata had honestly thought the slug summoner had fallen asleep, until she suddenly reached under her desk and procured, seemingly from nowhere, a bottle of sake. Want some? She asked bluntly, eyes still shut solidly. When Hinata shook her head, Tsunade seemed to understand, shrugged, and started attacking the bottle herself. After a rather long and arduous chug, she haphazardly tossed it onto her desk, just barely keeping its contents in check, before opening her eyes and looking right at Hinata's worried face. Something is indeed the matter, she said simply, sitting up in her chair, and folding her fingers together on the desktop in front of her. With you. Hinata jumped. Am I in trouble? Are my abilities really that bad? I thought that only my clan thought I was weak, but if the Hokage... Tsunade blinked at the sad grimace glanced across the Hyuga's face, realizing her mistake. You misunderstand me. Please, she gestured to one of the two simple wooden chairs positioned before her desk, take a seat. I just want to talk. Something is obviously bothering you. Now it was Hinata's turn to blink, before the Hokage's words registered and she complied. Are you certain you are capable of performing this mission? Tsunade asked with a raised eyebrow, causing Hinata to jump again, her thoughts returning to their original fearful roots. Oh of course, Lady Tsunade, she stammered out with wide eyes. She opened her mouth to continue defending herself, when the Hokage simply smiled and raised a hand. Please, Hinata, don't worry. I'm just concerned for your well-being is all. She smiled a bit more in order to try and comfort the girl, but consoling others was never her strong suit. She stuck to brevity and blunt honesty instead. But Hinata seemed to take the smile happily, giving a small one of her own, albeit forced. Hinata, please, tell me, what's wrong? The girl just blinked, and shifted her gaze to the floor, her flowing dark blue hair falling in front of her face and obscuring it from the Hokage's view. It's been 3 years. Tsunade could just barely make out the whisper coming from Hinata, but when she did, she grimaced in realization. Of course, how could I have been so blind? Has it really been that long already? She said softly, looking down at her hands below her. She was never a very good liar, that much was obvious. But maybe Hinata would take her rhetorical question blindly, like she had her smile earlier? When no response came, she had her answer. The blonde sighed and shook her head gently, her wide framing bangs shaking loose and flickering across her eyes like a feather in the wind. Under the circumstances, there was nothing you could do. Please don't blame yourself for what happened, Hinata. When she heard a sniffle from the girl before her, Tsunade realized Hinata was crying. Hey! Hinata blinked and looked up slowly, silent tears running down her face like raindrops on a pane of glass. When her eyes met the Hokage's, she gasped inwardly. It was now that she realized just how fatigued and disheveled the woman looked, a stark contrast to her typically meticulous attention to beauty and hygiene. Is she going through the same thing? Admitting that she'd been had, Tsunade let out a hollow chuckle and ran her hand through her hair, readjusting her unruly bangs and allowing the hollow feeling in her soul to finally struggle its way up to the surface. You're not the only one grieving, Hinata, she said bluntly, causing the girl to simply nod her head in trepidation. Jiraiya was like a brother to me. When I heard the news, she grimaced and closed her eyes. When she opened them again, She looked over at the girl before her. At the guilty frown on the brunette's face, Tsunade decided to continue. Now, that's not saying that you're not allowed to grieve as well. She sighed again, holding in her emotions, like a good shinobi. Just know that there are others around you that are experiencing the same thing you are. Don't be afraid to come talk to me, or to Sakura, or hell, even Kakashi. She leaned up in her chair, reaching forward and putting a hand over Hinata's firmly clenched fists, gripping each other in her lap. Don't suffer alone. I did that for years, and it did nothing but push me away from those that mattered. Learn from my mistakes. Be the person that Naruto wanted you to be. For him. Hinata jumped, and looked up at the Hokage with wide, tearful eyes. For him? For him, she repeated, a genuinely warm smile crossing her face for the first time in days. A much smaller, but just as heartfelt smile began to blossom on Hinata's face, and she nodded a few times quietly. Promise me, she started suddenly, gripping Hinata's hands a little more tightly, that you'll come talk to me when you get back if you need to. Okay? Hinata blinked and nodded in affirmation, still at a loss for words at the genuine concern the woman was showing for her. With another small smile, one that turned into a smirk, she pulled back, before taking another, although much more modest, swig of her sake. Alright then. Well, you had better get going. You only have— She trailed off and glanced at the clock on the wall, hidden partially by the bookcase. 12 minutes left to meet your team at the gates. Best get a move on. With a jolt, then a smile, Hinata nodded fervently, slowly rising to her feet. Thank you, Lady Tsunade. I will. Tsunade nodded once authoritatively, crossing her arms in front of her and leaning back in her chair. Good luck. To all of you. Bring him back safely. Right, Hinata said with a surprising amount of enthusiasm, even for her. Tsunade watched in mild amusement as the girl herself realized it, and bashfully took to leave the room. When the door closed again, and she was finally alone for the first time since this morning, Tsunade sighed and rubbed her eyes. That's enough mothering for one day. With another sip of the rice whiskey, the legendary sucker began to rifle around in her paper stacks, grumbling to herself. Now, where the hell are those scratch cards? The Case Cage rescue team had been running for nearly 4 days straight. The journey to the sand was a rough one, and after being caught in a freak sandstorm that delayed them a day, they were exhausted and ready to drop from exhaustion. But they had a job to do. When they first arrived on the scene, Kakashi had immediately ordered them to spread out and search for any intelligence they might find. And much to their chagrin, there wasn't much to go off of. The only significant information they had received was the Kankuro, the rather bold and brash puppet-wielding brother of Gaara, had attacked and been defeated by the strange, boulder-like man shortly after the assault, and was mortally wounded by some sort of deadly toxin that invaded his body and began to shut down his internal organs, one by one. That was, of course, until Sakura was able to stabilize him and he was able to speak once more. As the pink-haired medic Nin pored over the patient chart in the private room of the noble Sand Shinobi, Kankuro finally began to awaken from his coma-like state. The instant he could move again, he was already leaning forward and trying to get up. Until Sakura stopped him, and not so gently pushed him back into the bed's sweet embrace. That kid in the Akatsuki. Kankuro mumbled finally, still on the verge of slipping back into unconsciousness. Easy now, relax. You need to rest. I got the majority of the poison out, now you just have to let the antidote do its job. And that means no talking. Sakura lowered her clipboard, and stood up from the stool she was sitting on next to his bed to go through his vitals one more time. Sakura had toiled for nearly 24 continuous hours since they had arrived in order to create an antidote to the rather strange and serious poison that had entered Kankuro's system. Now that it was working, she was concerned that it might have ill effects on the body, just as harmful as the poison itself. After checking his pulse and temperature, she let out a sigh of relief. It looks like you're going to make a speedy recovery. You'll be fine in a week or so. Sakura smiled weakly, signs of exhaustion clearly written all over her face. No, I have to get out there. I have to go with you. Kankuro moaned, trying to move off of the bed. No, I won't allow that. You'll almost certainly die in the condition you're in right now. You're weak, you need to rest. Sakura stopped him, and pushed him back onto the pillows. You don't understand. The other Akatsuki, the one that poisoned me, It's Sasori of the Red Sand, Kankuro said weakly. What did he just say? An old, short, gray-haired woman burst into the room with a silent fury, and jetted over to the bed in the center. Lady Chio, I'm glad you're here. It would seem that the antidote is working, and it looks like Kanku. Did you just say Sasori of the Red Sand? Chio bent over and peered into the slightly closed glassy eyes of the bedridden shinobi. Lady Chio. Yes, Kankuro mumbled. He could already feel that he was on his way out, about to slip back into unconsciousness. This is bad, very bad indeed. It looks like I'll be needing to join you and your team after all, Sakura. Where is the White Fang's son? I must speak to him about this myself. She left as quickly and as ferociously as she arrived, leaving Sakura and Kankuro alone again. Well, that was interesting, Sakura thought to herself with a deadpan glance at the door, as it slammed shut. No, that's not the part that worries me. Kankuro whispered. Sakura leaned in, trying to catch what little she could of Kankuro's rapidly deteriorating voice. That boy, the Akatsuki member that took out Gaara single-handed, he's. Sakura leaned in more, but by that point, Kankuro had fallen back into unconsciousness. She frowned, and put the clipboard down on the stool. She grabbed her kunai pouch from the bedside table, and began to walk out of the room. It looks like we're in for a surprise, then. Sakura, how is Kankuro? The pink-haired kunoichi closed the door gently behind her, and looked at Hinata, who was sitting on a bench outside of Kankuro's hospital room, and sporting a rather concerned look on her face. Oh, Hinata, he's going to be fine. I managed to get enough poison out of his system before administering the antidote, so he should make a full recovery in a day or two. She finished off her diagnosis with a smile, and sat down next to Hinata. Hinata smiled slightly, and looked at the ground, twiddling her fingers together. That's good. Several heartbeats of comfortable silence occupied the air around the two-leaf ninja, only occasionally interrupted by the sounds of nurses coming and going from various rooms around the hospital. Every second or so, a reassuring and healthy beep would come from Kankuro's room, indicating that Sakura's assessment was accurate. Finally, Sakura turned and looked at the Hyuga heiress, and sighed. I miss him too. Hinata jumped at the words, somewhat because they broke the warm silence that had enveloped them, but mostly because Sakura hit the nail right on the head. She frowned, and looked down at the ground, obviously lost in thought. Acknowledging that Hinata wasn't going to respond quite yet, Sakura continued. I still remember where I was when we got that first message back, the one from Master Jiraiya. That is a day I will never forget. Hinata sniffled, and nodded, still staring at the ground absent-mindedly. Lady Tsunade called me into her office, and when I arrived, Kakashi-sensei was already there. I could tell something was really, seriously wrong the moment I walked in. Sakura paused for a moment, and let her memory catch up a bit. I don't remember much after that, it was all a blur. I just remember shaking uncontrollably and getting really, irrationally angry for some reason. After that, the next thing I knew, we were at his funeral, in front of an empty casket, and sharing our favorite stories about our favorite knuckle-headed orange-clad blondie. She smiled weakly, and waited to see if Hinata would respond. To her surprise, she did, but Sakura had to really strain her hearing in order to make out the near whisper that came out of the girl's mouth. I was training with Neji when I got the news. Kiba and Shino had just returned from a mission, and were coming back from speaking with the Hokage. They had found out then, and rushed to tell me. I'm glad they did. It warms my heart to know that they knew how much he meant to me. Hinata's voice wavered, and she stopped before she began to cry again. Sakura reached over and put her hand on the Hyuga's shoulder. Hinata, it's okay. You can let it out. No. Her voice was firm and loud, shocking Sakura. She looked up and right into Sakura's eyes. Naruto wouldn't have wanted that, to see me cry so much over him. He'd want me to become stronger, and a better person because of it. To continue his legacy. You're right, smiled Sakura. It's what Naruto would have wanted. Saint still, I don't think I believe that it was just a training accident. Master Jiraiya wouldn't have allowed something like that to happen. Hinata looked down again, a discontent look on her face. Something tells me that they were attacked, or poisoned, or something. Sakura looked at Hinata with a puzzled expression. No, if I remember correctly, the letter from Jiraiya explicitly said that his death was as a result of chakra exhaustion, due to Naruto's attempt to create a giant Rasengan. You know how he was, always pushing himself past the breaking point, always living on the edge. She cracked her knuckles and frowned indignantly. All I know is, if I were there, I would have knocked some sense into both of them. If I didn't know any better, I'd say that that perv was off ogling at some woman, when Naruto snuck off to get some training on his own. Hinata smiled warmly at the image of the two of them, then saddened again. It's just a shame that we can't ask Master Jiraiya himself exactly what happened. The medical ninja shook her head, and looked at the ground as well. It was barely 2 weeks later. That was a very tough month to get through. Lady Tsunade had never looked worse, she added mentally, remembering the ghostly apparition of her sensei at the Sanin's funeral. What was his cause of death again? Hinata had a troubled look on her face again. Sakura sighed, and once again delved deep into the banks of her memory in order to quell Hinata's curiosity. Well, if you remember, Naruto's body disappeared the night after Jiraiya found him. She was going to say, dead, but she figured that would be too insensitive right now, especially in front of Hinata. Instead, she just paused, and decided to simply skip the word and move on. Out in the woods where they had been training. As far as Master Jiraiya could tell, there were no external wounds or injuries, apart from a blistered hand from forming the Rasengan hundreds of times. Therefore, he deduced that he had to have died from some sort of internal complication, and all signs seemed to point towards chakra exhaustion. Sakura paused, breaking out of her robotic medical professional voice, because she recognized that she sounded like she was rattling off facts, not describing the death of a friend. After composing herself, she continued. Jiraiya decided that it'd be best to bring his body back to the town they were staying at the time and to try and get some help from the nearby hospital. However, while he was on the other side of the building writing his letter to the Hokage, someone took his body and ran off with it. Hinata spoke before Sakura could continue. Are we sure that's what happened? She was twiddling her fingers again, obviously conflicted by the information. Well, dead people can't just get up and walk away, now, can they? Sakura smiled grimly over at Hinata, but the joke either passed her by, or she decided not to acknowledge it. She grimaced at the shocked look that the Hyuga heiress gave her, and mentally punched herself. Sorry, that was insensitive. And no, Sakura, you're right. Hinata nodded, and Sakura continued her explanation, still not entirely convinced. Well, if you think about it, I don't believe any Jinchuriki have ever died while still holding their tailed beast within them. Not to mention the fact that Naruto was a bit of a living legend when it came to his chakra and stamina. I'll bet you a bowl of ramen that someone wanted to get their hands on him for that reason. This time, Hinata giggled slightly to herself, thinking about how much Naruto loved ramen. Sakura smiled warmly, glad she had slightly broken the sad atmosphere that had developed around them, and went on. So, Jiraiya went after the body, and the people that took it. He apparently didn't get far, because we received a letter from the Hidden Stone 15 days later saying that they had recovered the body of one of the legendary Sanin. Sakura put her hands up, and made rather vivacious air quotes, mocking the cryptic nature of the letter. At first, we were all hoping that Naruto and Jiraiya had finally nabbed that bastard Orochimaru while they were out and about, but Sakura trailed off, assuming that Hinata could fill in the blanks. The brunette nodded, signaling that she had. Thank you, Sakura. I had always wondered about that, Hinata said firmly, eyes still planted on the floor in front of her. Before Sakura could continue, a sand nurse rounded the corner and approached her. Lady Sakura, how is Lord Kankuro doing? Oh, he's fine, just resting now. I filled out the charts on the clipboard next to his bed, there's a more detailed analysis there. Sakura smiled, immediately transitioning from the role of a helping friend to the role of a professional medical ninja. Excellent, thank you Lady Sakura. I'll take it from here. The nurse passed them by, and began to open the door to the puppet master's room. With a smile, she turned around and addressed the two of them. That reminds me, the rest of your group have assembled in the lobby downstairs, and they asked that I tell you that you were about to head out again. Thank you, nurse. We'll be on our way then. Sakura stood, and Hinata tentatively did the same. When the nurse was out of earshot, Sakura cracked her knuckles and scowled out the window of the hospital, at the far-reaching dunes of their inhospitable surroundings. All right, Hinata, Sakura grinned menacingly, as she took a few steps forward. Let's go kick some Akatsuki ass. 3 figures trudged through the harsh desert sand, wind whipping at their cloaks, sand blasting to and fro. One figure appeared to be carrying another, while the third simply followed along at the same slow, steady pace of his companion. Then suddenly, the carrier spoke, his voice passed along by the currents in the wind and only just barely picked up by the follower. You are aware that they've most likely called for the leaf. The follower made only a simple wave of his hand in lackadaisical boredom, signaling his comrade to get to the point. The stout, masked figure of the strange scorpion man frowned in indignation at his partner's lack of respect. You may encounter some of your old friends, if they have, you know. This time, the follower did nothing to show he acknowledged the carrier's rebuttal. The carrier was about to open his mouth again to curse out the follower, when something clicked inside of his mind. Instead, he began to smile menacingly from behind his shroud. Oh, don't tell me that you're expecting that, he said in jest. Once again, the follower did nothing but continue marching off towards their unseen destination. The carrier, eyes twinkling in mild surprise, chuckled once. You are, aren't you? He smirked and shook his head. Leave it to you to have something in the works, woven together with the leader's plans. I trust you intend to take care of the matter yourself? The follower stopped, and the carrier followed suit. A pair of vibrant red, vulpine eyes locked with his own lifeless black ones. At the contact, the follower's eyes narrowed, as if to say, stay out of it, and you'll live to see another day. The carrier chuckled again and continued on his way. As you wish, he said back behind him, before the endless sands of wind country absorbed their silhouettes, fading off into the horizon. All right, Pa-kun, what do you know so far? The ninja hound looked up at Kakashi, and then at the rest of the group assembled in the lobby of the Hidden Sands medical facility. Well, I've detected the scent of Gaara. He's heading east, towards the Land of Fire. Kakashi spoke again. And what of the 2 Akatsuki members that took him? Pa-kun shook his head. I can't smell either of them. Either they're really good at hiding their scents, which I find hard to believe, or they aren't human. Aren't human? Sakura looked at the dog with her mouth agape. Just what the hell are these Akatsuki guys anyway? I don't know, but it certainly isn't good. What is it? This time, it was the anxious voice of Neji. He could tell that there was something that the dog was leaving out. Well, as you all are probably aware of by now, I'm a ninja hound. Pa-kun looked around the room at all the faces that seemed to be screaming, we already knew that, and continued speaking. I am primarily trained for searching out scents, but there's something else I can search out as well. Guy, clearly rearing to go and test the strength of his youth, stared at the hound. Well, what is it? Spit it out already. Chakra. I can sense chakra, Pa-kun sighed. You just couldn't let me build up the dramatic reveal, couldn't you? Unfortunately, Pa-kun, we're on a tight timescale currently. Kakashi spoke first, before Guy could get another word in edgewise. Right. Well, in addition to Gaara's already monumental chakra, I sense a chakra far more massive and evil than that of the One-Tails. Only 2? But how could that be? There are 3 of them out there, including Gaara. Lee quipped, with a determined look that rivaled his sensei's. Well, honestly, because it's the only one I could sense between the 2 Akatsuki members. This chakra is so enormous that it blots out almost all others in the area. I can only sense Gaara because of the One-Tails, and even its chakra is just a droplet compared to this other guy's. Pa-kun looked up at Kakashi. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is, I recognize that chakra. Only this time it's much, much bigger than I remember. There were several gasps of shock, before Guy spoke again. What? You recognize the chakra? Does that mean that you know the identity of this mysterious second kidnapper? Pa-kun looked back up at Guy. No, not for sure. Because the chakra I'm sensing is the 9 tails. That's impossible. Sakura exclaimed. The 9 tails died along with Naruto almost a year and a half ago. Actually, no it's not. Tailed beasts are not living per se. They are sentient chakra beings that can be reformed in the event of the death of their Jinchuriki, Kakashi responded. If I remember correctly, the same thing happened to the previous Mizukage, who happened to be a Jinchuriki. Rumor has it that the 3 tails that was sealed within him has reformed somewhere in the hidden mist. The old woman known as Chiyo nodded in the back, listening intently. Yes, I recall hearing that as well. So what does this mean? That the 9 tails has returned and is actively assisting the Akatsuki? Neji looked at both Kakashi and Pakun with narrowed eyes. That doesn't sound like something that the Nine Tails would be willing to do. You're right, Kakashi replied. I personally believe that the Nine Tails reappeared somewhere and was subsequently sealed within another Jinchuriki. What? This time, almost everyone in the group jumped. This was startling news, if it happened to be true. Yes. Judging by the fact that the Akatsuki started out their assault on Jinchuriki with Gaara, who houses the One Tails, I assume that whatever they are planning to do with them requires them to be acquired in order, from least number of tails to most. Now, this is only hypothetical, but I'm guessing that the Akatsuki found the Nine Tails first, and rather than trying to keep it locked away, full-sized, for an extended period of time, they instead chose to seal it away in one of their own members until such time that they can properly deal with it. There were a few murmurs of agreement, before Pakun spoke up again. But Kakashi, the amount of chakra that's being spewed into the air from this new Jinchuriki is massive. Much more massive than the amount I sensed coming from Naruto when I saw him last. That's true. I'll bet that the seal they're using to keep it in check isn't nearly as powerful as the 8 trigram seal that the 4th Hokage used on Naruto. So it's not quite as good at holding back all of that energy. Lord Fourth was an expert in sealing jutsus, so either the Akatsuki didn't know of the 8 trigram seal, or, more likely, they knew it was short-term, and chose a weaker seal on purpose. Finally, Pakun nodded. Alright, I think that's a reasonable assumption. Murmurs of agreement came from the rest of the group, before the ninja hound spoke up again. Regardless of origins, I know where they are. They're about 2 days out at full speed, and I can take you there. Alright then, lead the way. Kakashi nodded, as the Leaf Ninja and Chio ran out the doors of the hospital and out into the windy desert twilight. We're almost there. Come, comrades, let us push ourselves to the limit in order to achieve our goal. Lee called out from ahead of the group. Everyone sighed, even Guy. Kakashi shouted ahead. Lee, wait, if you push yourself any harder, you'll be useless in the upcoming fight against the Akatsuki. Lee froze immediately, crashing through the tree branch he was about to land on like a drunken rhinoceros. You are most correct, Kakashi-sensei. In fact, we must not push ourselves to the limit in order to achieve our goal. Finally, he gets it, moaned Sakura, as she jumped down to make sure that Lee was alright. But the fall didn't seem to faze him at all. Onward, he shouted, and jumped back up to the trees. Neji, for once in his life, partially agreed with his green-clad partner. Actually, Kakashi-sensei, I believe that we can probably pick up the pace a little bit. We've been traveling for a day and a half. If we have any hope of catching them before they arrive at whatever destination they are heading towards, we need to move quickly. More quickly than we have been. Kakashi nodded. You're right, we need to hurry. The longer it takes to get there, the more difficult it will be to rescue Gaara. There's no need, Pakun stated from the front of the formation. They've stopped. We'll be there any moment now. Wonderful, replied Chio with a hint of venom in her voice. I can't wait to see my grandson again. It's been a while. Oi, Sasori, called out a child's voice. It was laced with a deep growl, and a deep malice, and gave off the illusion of 2 voices speaking simultaneously, one young and high, and another dark and low. After several moments, a gruff and gravelly voice replied. You sense them too? The 2 Akatsuki members stopped, and leapt down into a clearing that they had spotted below, cloaks billowing behind them. The short and hunched man unraveled what looked to be a scorpion's tail, and the captured case cage hit the ground with a loud thump. Yes, replied the child. We're being followed. The short man's face smirked underneath his masked face. So we are. They should be just up ahead. We need to be careful now, as to. Boom. Kakashi's words were cut short as the forest in front of them vaporized almost immediately in a massive explosion that consumed all in its path. A few hundred yards from the Leaf Ninja erupted a massive mushroom cloud. One that plumed into the bright blue sky like a virus, infecting the happy and carefree world with pain and overwhelming power. The 7 ninja and ninja dog were blown backwards into the forest from which they came. After the initial shockwave, the blast itself approached quickly, but not quick enough, as Kakashi weaved a few hand signs and slammed his palms into the ground as he and everyone else slid backwards. Earth-style. Mud wall. A huge mound of earth adorned with the faces of several ninja hounds erupted between the flailing shinobi and the blast wave. For a moment, it looked like the wall would hold. But a split second later, another wall appeared behind the first, just as the explosion broke free from the old wall and continued on its march of destruction. After another moment of fire and flame and noise, the blast receded, and all that was left was the far-off sound of thousands of birds taking to the skies and fleeing from the danger. Sakura gasped and coughed, having had the wind knocked out of her as she was blown backwards into a tree. What was that? Hinata struggled to her feet, and immediately came to the aid of her cousin and his sensei. Lee crawled out of a trench that his own body had dug into the ground as he was blown backwards, and stumbled towards his teammates, holding his left arm tenderly and wincing every time he took a step. Kakashi jumped down to meet them, never taking his eyes off of the mud wall that stood between them and what was undoubtedly a scene of charred forest. His Sharingan was exposed, and his guard was up. This was it, the Akatsuki. As impressive as always, Kyuubi, came a chuckle from atop the wall. After 2 or 3 heartbeats, a short, stout silhouette appeared on the top of the wall, looking down on them. Although next time, please give me more warning. I barely had time to shield the one-tails. Another series of heartbeats. Now the entire shinobi rescue team was focused on the wall. Sakura moved towards Lee, and began healing his wounded arm. It's a shame, really, came another voice. This one was strange. Sakura knew the voice was from a child that was several years her junior. She could tell by the way he spoke. And yet it was also a voice that could have come from the depths of hell itself. I thought I'd take out at least one of them by the time they got in range. Sakura immediately turned back to the wall, just as another figure joined the first. A cloud moved in front of the sun, blotting out the blinding light that shielded the identities of the 2 Akatsuki they found before them. Finally, the team could get a decent look at who they were up against. On the left was an almost round man. On the front, his head stuck out like a haphazardly placed afterthought on a festival costume. A jet black cloak was wrapped around him, in perfect condition, speckled with blood-red blotches that resembled the shape of clouds. On his head was a straw hat that extended a good solid foot in all directions from his head, with tweed strands dangling from the rim. However, the man's face was not obstructed from view. They could see 2 beady brown eyes looking back at them, and a mouth covered by a piece of fabric. However, they could tell by the glare of the man that he was smiling. The boy on the right was a completely different story altogether. His cloak was ripped and ragged and smoldering. No doubt due to the jutsu he just cast, thought Sakura. The left shoulder and sleeve of the cloak was completely missing, revealing a sizable portion of his chest and upper body, and the right shoulder had seen better days. The torn and tattered edges flapped about in the wind, revealing more of his skin. All across his body were deep gashes and cuts, many the length and width of a full-sized arm. Underneath the cuts was a dark red, crimson orb of energy. Sakura had almost mistaken it for blood before realizing that it was moving, flowing. On his head was an equally singed straw hat, very similar in size and shape to his companion's. However, his head was pointed down, looking at his feet, which were covered in what used to be white stockings that wrapped around and under his black shinobi sandals. The mud wall began to collapse back into the ground, and the 2 Akatsuki rode it down as it fell. As they descended from their perch, Sakura noticed that the short one on the left had what looked like a scorpion's tail sticking above his head, pointed menacingly at them. She looked back over at the one on the right, trying to deduce who, or what, he was. All she saw was a lock of orange hair stick out from a hole in the top of the hat that billowed around in the wind as much as the rest of his apparel did. Chiyo, who had been mysteriously missing since just before the explosion, landed amidst the leaf shinobi, and glared in the direction of the 2 cloaked shinobi. Sasori, it's been a while. The short one chuckled heartily before responding. Ah, grandmother. I had a feeling that you would be among the rescue group. He hissed the last words mockingly, never turning his eyes away from Chiyo. Indeed, once I heard that you were one of the assailants. I just had to see my grandson again one last time, before he died. She stuck her hands in her robe's pockets, and withdrew 2 small scrolls. It's been a while since I've needed to use these, it's only fitting. A slight chuckle left her lips as she opened them both and swiped her already bloody thumbs across the summoning seals in one fluid motion. In a puff of smoke, a pair of puppets that looked uncannily human appeared before her. Her fingers were now outstretched, and small, nearly invisible chakra strands connected the puppets to her. She wiggled them slightly, and the two figures contorted into attack positions. The mother and father puppets? How archaic, chortled Sasori. I expected better from you, Granny. Chiyo smirked and jerked her fingers forward, urging life into her puppets. Not necessary, she shouted as the mother and father launched forwards, brandishing various weapons. Enough. A massive red hand whipped around from behind the yet unnamed Akatsuki, which obliterated the two puppets instantaneously. Weapons and chunks of wood flew in all directions, and all that remained of the puppets was two ash marks on the forest floor in front of them. It slowly retracted back to the child, as he fumed. We don't have time for children's toys. We need to move on, the sealing begins at sundown. Hinata gasped, as Chiyo simply frowned menacingly at the boy. But it was Sasori, not Chiyo, that spoke first. Children's toys? He turned to his partner. My art is forever. No child could ever hope to grasp the concept of everlasting life and power. Shut up, Sasori, growled the disheveled character. Sakura shivered as she heard him talk. It was creepy, two voices from one mouth. We do this my way. The puppet master grumbled back, before turning to face the ninja yet again. The pink-haired Kunoichi grimaced as Sasori's companion sighed with faux relief. That's better. Now stay in your place. I can handle this alone. That voice, thought Sakura. It sounds pretty familiar. She heard Hinata gasp to her right. She turned to look at him, and she was frozen in shock and terror at the boy in front of her. Sakura returned her gaze to the two as the mysterious one began to speak in double yet again. The one tails is no longer any of your concern. This is a matter between tailed beasts, and I don't intend to allow any of you kid to interfere with the inner workings of a force that is more powerful than anything you can ever possibly admit to even just barely understanding. Hinata began sobbing. Is she really this scared? I understand her fear, but I've never heard her cry like that in front of an enemy before. Just who are you, anyway? Came Kakashi's voice in front of her. You call yourself a tailed beast, but you are clearly a human. Perhaps a Jinchuriki, but still human. The tailed beast broke out into a loud and crazed bout of laughter. Maybe before, maybe in another time, but now? His hand reached up to grab his straw hat. His fingernails were grown into long, dark claws, and on his ring finger was a large blue ring. Even on his hand, holes poked through his skin and a bright red swirling energy force peeked out at them. He grasped the hat and began to tug. I am Kyuubi, the nine-tailed fox. He tossed the hat aside, still looking at the ground and shielding his face from the group. A crop of messy orange hair burst into view. There were chunks of hair and flesh missing from the top, and more of the mysterious chakra was oozing out there as well. That's impossible. You're only a child. The orange-haired figure only laughed harder. Wait, I know that voice for sure. Hinata began mumbling, still crying and trying not to break down completely. It can't be. It can't be. I think you'll find that you're the child, Kakashi-sensei, roared the boy, finally looking up and staring at them with his large, red, slitted eyes. What? Sakura heard her sensei whisper. What did you call me? But she wasn't paying too much attention. She was, instead, focused completely on the now exposed face of the boy in front of her. There was no denying it. It was him. Naruto. There's no way. There's just no way, Sakura whispered, looking up at her old teammate, eyes quivering in their sockets. It was Naruto all right, there was no mistaking it. His face was mostly the same as she remembered it from 3 years ago, slightly chubby cheeks, 3 whisker marks adorning each side. He still had his lopsided grin, but it was made all the more unsettling by the look in his eyes. And his eyes. They were a deep, crimson red. A stark contrast from the pools of crystal blue that she was so used to seeing staring back at her, asking her on dates and pulling pranks on the village. That innocent look was gone, replaced with one that was crazed, deranged, even. He had small black rod piercings across his forehead and in front of his ears, giving him the appearance of a cadaver that had been pulled apart for research then clamped back together. The color of his skin played the part as well, giving off an eerie pale and lifeless glow. But the most startling change of all was his hair. His once untamed and wild blonde hair had become a rather fiery orange color, and small pieces of his scalp were missing, giving his hair the appearance of having lost a fight with a pair of scissors and a roll of bubblegum. His forehead protector was in tatters, and the symbol for the hidden leaf, set in metal in the middle, had a sharp and jagged line drawn through it. Sakura resisted the urge to gag. His appearance was too much for her to take in at once. He looked like a dead man walking, and from what she had understood from how he disappeared, she didn't doubt that to be the case at all. She urged herself to speak, but all that came out was a horrified whimper. It was Guy who finally broke the silence as the Case Cage rescue team stared at their former comrade, stupefied by what they were seeing. "Just what are you now, anyway, Naruto? And who did this to you?" Naruto's eyes bulged slightly as he broke out into another fit of deranged laughter. "Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. And what am I? I just told you." He leaned forward, completely expressionless, and stated plainly, "I'm Kyuubi." But you were dead," shouted Neji. "Jiraiya saw your dead body himself." Another fit of laughter, and a long, exasperated sigh. Was dead? Was dead? He giggled maniacally, and took a step forward, staring Neji down. Then, without warning, he took out a kunai from within his tattered robes, and plunged it into his chest, where his heart should have been. He watched their horrified faces and cackled again. "You see, Neji, I am dead." His gaze softened as he let go of the kunai, leaving it firmly seated within his upper body. "This body is nothing more than a puppet that I'm stuck to," he spat, a look of pure hatred on his face. "What are you talking about? Naruto, slow down." Kakashi took a step back, towards where Lee, Neji, and Hinata were standing. Now Lee spoke. His voice was ragged, he was obviously in pain. But that didn't stop him from asking a question. "How do we know you are who you say you are? Are you really the Naruto I know?" Naruto sighed, and smirked. He stuck out his left hand, snapped a few times, and held his index finger out, pointing towards the sky. As if on cue, a massive orb of blue swirling chakra began to rotate on top of it, where it held for a moment while he addressed his former companions again. "This enough of an explanation for you?" Sakura eyed the Rasengan, her worst fears becoming true. "So this really is Naruto then, what happened?" Hinata screamed, taking 2 steps forward. "What happened to you?" Naruto ignored her, fascinated by the orb of energy he was holding. After a moment or two, blue and black orbs began to amass themselves around him, orbiting around the Rasengan, before fusing with it completely, turning it a deep shade of purple. After he was satisfied with its size, he looked it over with a bored expression, tossing it from hand to hand, index finger to index finger. Kakashi's eyes widened. Is that? Suddenly, Naruto flicked upwards, and the small orb flew off into the sky. A moment later, it erupted in a mind-numbingly massive and powerful explosion, blotting out the sun and deafening the group of ninja below it for a moment. After a few heartbeats, the blast receded, leaving a massive cloud of vaporized atmosphere, and ash from the few unfortunate birds that couldn't get away in time. Naruto's expression was still bored, and he was now focused on the ring on his finger. It was a blue-teal color, and Naruto twisted it around his right index finger with mild amusement. Then, he turned back to the Leaf Ninja. "And now you know that I'm serious when I say that I'm the Kyuubi. But how? What did Naruto do to release you? And why didn't you reform after Naruto died?" The boy placed his hand over his chest, around the kunai, and donned an expression of fake hurt. "You talk about me as if I'm not standing right in front of you." He grinned, and moved his hand to his face, gently rubbing the black metal rods that were embedded in his skin. "You mean you're both the Kyuubi and Naruto?" Kakashi acclaimed. "How is that even possible?" Naruto looked down on the group, and let out a single chuckle. "Huh, there's a lot that even I didn't know, until it all started happening." He reached into his robes again, and pulled out a small, mangled book, and tossed it to Kakashi. He caught it without breaking eye contact. "What's this?" Naruto closed his eyes, and smirked. "It should help answer all of your questions. They say knowledge is power, but in this case, I'd say thinking something like that would be rather foolish, wouldn't you agree?" Finally, Kakashi looked down, and saw the words, "training log and diary," along the top, followed by the name, Jiraiya, etched into the bottom. The leather-bound book had seen better days, but it was still in one piece. He looked back up at his former student, a look of surprise and curiosity across his face. "Why are you giving me this?" Naruto shrugged with a smile. "You deserve to know. At least, that's how I see it." As Kakashi looked at the book again, Naruto glanced at the sky, and noted the position of the sun. He cursed, and turned back to Kakashi. "Well, it looks like our time here has run out. You lot made me who I am today, and for that I am grateful. For that reason, I will spare your lives." His eyes narrowed, as he glanced briefly at everyone before his gaze returned to his senseis. "I will not make the same decision twice." With a flurry of black and red, he turned around quickly, and began to walk back towards the charred forest behind him. What they saw next made their stomachs turn, and Hinata let out another sob. There was a massive hole in the back of the boy, only slightly covered by a small tattered piece of his Akatsuki robe. Within the hole, a large mass of black and red chakra flowed about, flashing occasionally, and glowing with an evil aura that radiated outwards like heat from a flame. Naruto chortled again at their reaction, and turned around slightly to look back at them as Sasori made his way back to the hiding place that he had stashed Gaara in. "Like what you see." Finally, Sakura stepped forward as well. "Wait, stop, what are you planning to do with Gaara?" Naruto stopped, and looked at her. His gaze was like the blade of a knife, and it drew all the heat out of her in a moment. She stood there, shaking, terrified, as he blinked a few times and shook his head. "It's not Gaara we want. We only want the One Tails. Gaara is of no concern to us. We can't let you just steal your friend away like that." Neji growled, moving into his gentle fist taijutsu stance. Naruto let out a shrill laugh, then turned to look at him. "That's true, I guess. I should have expected as much. Oh well, better to be safe than sorry." As the group began to move forward towards their former comrade, a red flash shot across their fields of vision all at once, and they fell to the ground, nearing unconsciousness. "I can't have you meddling in my affairs, now can I?" he said, looking down at Kakashi with a smile, before turning around and walking away. Hinata watched his cloaked silhouette walk off into the distance, as her eyelids grew heavy and her head began to throb. What happened to you, and, Naruto?" Sakura woke with a start, almost cracking her skull against Lee's, who was hovering over her with a damp cloth and dabbing her forehead. He jumped, she jumped, and everyone else in the clearing jumped. "Oh, good. Sakura, you're awake too." Kakashi sighed, before waving at her from across the way. He was sitting on a tree trunk, with a few pieces of paper out, jotting things down. He had the small leather-bound book sitting on the log beside him, and was watching Sakura try and stand up with a look of concern. "Are you sure you should be moving around? I'm not exactly a medical expert, but I can tell when someone has had some minor head injuries." Sakura stood, grimacing and grabbing her head before looking back up at her sensei. "I'll be fine in a moment. I just need to get my bearings, that's all." She looked around, and noticed that they were in the same clearing they had been in before when they encountered Naruto, only now it was late at night. A small campfire danced about in the center of the clearing, where Hinata was laying, still unconscious. Neji and Guy were sitting on the opposite side of the fire, looking solemnly into it as it flowed around, moving across the wood and the pile like a sickness. Lee was sitting to her right, staring at her with his big black eyes, wondering if she was okay. She rubbed her face, and sat back down again. "There we go. Much better." She popped her neck, and looked back at Kakashi. "What happened, exactly? If I didn't know any better, I'd say that we just ran into Naruto. And he was with the Akatsuki. And where's Chiyo?" Kakashi murmured in agreement. "I thought it was a dream too. But no, it's not." He turned slightly, and picked up the book that was sitting next to him. "Chiyo went after them, I think. But regardless, you might want to read this." She caught it easily. He had only underhanded it to her. She gasped slightly at seeing the name and title of the book, and quickly flipped it open to read it, before closing it again suddenly. "Wait, what about Gaara? I lost the trail," came Pakun's voice, jumping down into the clearing from the treetops above. "Wherever they are, they're shielded. I can't detect any of the Nine Tails chakra anymore." Sakura sighed, and Kakashi just looked at her. "This mission is a failure. We are going to head back to the Leaf and try to dissect this new development properly. And try to figure out a way to bring him back." The girl only nodded, still looking at the book in front of her, as Hinata began to stir. What happened?" she mumbled, as she got to her feet. Suddenly, her eyes shot open. "He's alive. Somehow, he's alive." She smiled slightly, then frowned, remembering that he had almost killed them for the fun of it. Guy piped up. "Yes, and whoever did that to him was most unyouthful in every way. I have my money on Orochimaru." He glared at the fire for a moment, then jumped up with a renewed fervor. "All right then. Time to get back to training. He took off into the charred woods, jumping on his hands until he couldn't be seen anymore. Kakashi only deadpanned and sighed, shaking his head. I don't know how he does it. It wasn't Orochimaru, wasn't it? The lack of stuttering in Hinata's voice shocked them slightly, especially after what she had just seen. Their shock, however, was dwarfed by the words she spoke themselves. What do you mean, Hinata? Sakura looked up at the brunette, who had since begun to frown angrily into the fire in front of her. Well, he didn't have a curse mark. At least, not one that I could see, plus, I mostly just have this gut feeling. You're right, it wasn't Orochimaru that did this. This time, Kakashi's voice stunned the shell-shocked shinobi. He pointed to the book. That book tells us everything that we need to know. It fills in all the blanks. Naruto was right. Then he, too, averted his eyes to the fire before them. I couldn't have been more wrong with my hypothesis. He mumbled, before putting his hands into his pockets. Neji piped up. We have to get this information to Lady Hokage. How far away are we from the hidden leaf? Kakashi looked up at him. We're a little less than a day's walk. We should get there by midday tomorrow, if we hurry. Then, his voice took a much more serious tone. You're right. We need to get this intel back to the leaf as soon as possible. If this is true, then we are going to need some serious time to think. Sakura couldn't help herself anymore, and opened up to the first page of the diary. Her eyes grew wide as she read the first page. Training Log and Diary, by Jiraiya. Entry 1, 2 days before departure with Naruto. I was told by Tsunade that it would be a good idea if I wrote down the progress and development of Naruto's training, in case something were to go wrong, or for future reference. For once, I actually agree with her. If the Akatsuki are really after him, then there's a good chance that we'll run into some trouble along the way, and I want to make sure that our travels are well documented enough that others can learn from this experience. After all, a 3-year training expedition across the world with a legendary Sannin is something that many would kill for. Regardless, we leave 2 days from now at sunrise. Our first stop along the way is a pleasant little hot springs resort just north of the Hidden Leaf Village. Somewhere where I'm sure I'll find lots of lovely specimens for my research into the next Makeout Tactics novel. I already anticipate that it will be a bestseller, and I haven't even put pen to paper yet. In fact, I think I'll start right away. I'll just have to stop by the woman's bath here in the Leaf in order to gather some more inspiration. Entry 2, Day 2 of training. And we're off. Naruto got a little peeved at our first destination, and demanded that we go somewhere else. I normally wouldn't buckle to that brat's demands, but the woman heard him screaming and shouting and I got busted. So now we're on the road again, this time heading towards a small village in the hills towards the Hidden Rain. It's come to my understanding that we are going to need to tap into the Nine Tails chakra in order for Naruto to have a snowball's chance in hell of defending himself against the Akatsuki. That brat has talent, I'll give him that. But talent alone doesn't stop a group of rogue S-class ninja from coming in and snatching you up in the night like the boogeyman. For now, I've got him on some chakra control exercises. He doesn't seem to be enjoying them, but he has to start with the basics. How this kid has gotten anywhere is beyond me. Well, actually, it isn't. It's obviously because of the tutelage of his amazing sensei that he's made it this far. But regardless, the basics aren't called basics for no good reason. So for now, that's what we'll be working towards. In the meantime, I'll be keeping my eyes peeled for anything that could possibly help in taming the Nine Tails within Naruto. This next village has a library, perhaps I'll snoop around in their restricted section. You never know what sorts of secrets that long-extinct clans leave behind that are ripe for the picking. Sort of like another series of restricted books. Hee. Entry 3, Day 62 of training. I found something. I couldn't believe it at first, but I think I finally found an answer to what we need. It's an old sealing jutsu that was long since used to incapacitate large forest creatures that would rampage through their village all the time. It seems far-fetched, but I think I can actually modify the sealing technique so that it works in combination with the 8 trigram seal that Minato placed on his son, and I think it will completely suppress the Nine Tails personality and allow him to tap into its chakra without consequence or worry of the tailed beast getting out. I'll be working on that in the coming days. For now though, I've been training Naruto in basic combat reasoning. For goodness sake, the fact that this kid has lived this long is a miracle in itself. Once he can finally think a little bit better on his feet, we'll finally try to get to some real, meaningful stuff. As soon as I get this jutsu formula worked out, we'll be starting on that immediately. Entry 4, Day 78 of training. We did it. I did it. After toiling over the sealing jutsu I figured out a way to get it to work with the 8 trigrams seal. And it worked great. Naruto says that now the 9 tails has finally shut up. And, he's been able to tap into its chakra almost completely so far. He's been pretty excited about the power boost, but I can't let it all get to his head. For now though, I think that I'll be trying to get him to master the big ball Rasengan technique. Now that he has extra chakra in spades, he can properly train for longer periods of time without too much fatigue. Before, this would have seriously exhausted him. Now though, I'll bet that he can pull off a few dozen of these bad boys consecutively in combat. That is, of course, if he's actually able to get it down. And for as hard-headed as he is, I'm finding it hard to hope he'll ever master it. Also, I ran into a half-dozen beautiful women on the riverfront this afternoon. For further reference, please see Research Notes, page 387. I drew a pretty generous picture of one of them there. She'll definitely be inspiration for my next book. Entry 5, Day 85 of training. Honestly, did I ever have doubts in the kid? He's mastered the big ball Rasengan, at least, his is bigger than mine is now. HMMPF. Regardless, I think we'll move on to some shadow clone formations. I have an idea for how he can use them as jumping platforms while in mid-air to change direction. It's possible it's nothing, but it's worth a shot. Something strange has started happening to Naruto though. His hair's started turning orange. Well, the hair that's actually staying on his head. For some reason, he's losing clumps of it on a daily basis, and it's seriously starting to freak me out. Part of me thinks that he's doing this in order to spite me. That cheeky son of a bitch. I'll have to go through his stuff and try to find that hair dye. Because I bet you half the profits of the next Makeout Tactics book that he's gonna come for me next. Entry 6, Day 102 of training. This isn't good, I'll admit. Naruto is getting very fatigued, very quickly now. I honestly have no idea what's wrong with him. Maybe he's just pulling my leg. But honestly, that boy would saw off his own foot if it meant he could keep training. Regardless of fatigue, his hair has started to turn orange. It's rather strange seeing him like this now. Every time I see him, I jump, because he looks a little like Yahiko. Except with mostly blonde hair. And he doesn't have a Rinnegan-wielding friend. Yet, note to self. Look into relationship between Rinnegan and orange hair. Naruto has been able to pull off mid-air direction changes using shadow clones. I have to admit, it's a pretty useful technique. However, now he's adamant that he can increase the size of his big ball Rasengan even more than he already has, and has basically spent every waking moment trying to do so. If he gets the damn thing any bigger, I'm going to have to start trying to pump more chakra into my own giant Rasengan. I swear, this whole trip has been nothing but a power struggle. Entry 7, Day 111 of training. Naruto's fallen ill. Very ill. I'm taking him to the nearby hospital to see what they have to say. Entry 8, Day 112 of training. Well, turns out I was right. It's chakra exhaustion. The bastard's run himself dry with all the big ball Rasengan he's made the last few days. Still, I'm a little concerned with some of the things that have been happening to Naruto recently, so I'm going to try to take the seal off and give him some time to recuperate before we try anything else. His hair has turned completely orange, and he looks older than Tsunade does. Something's wrong with him, so we're gonna play it safe and just remove the seal and go from there. Entry 9, Day 113 of training. Naruto unresponsive. Taking to hospital now. Very bad feeling. This is unbelievable. A wide-eyed Tsunade set the journal down, and looked up at the team of exhausted travelers. She put her hands together and rested her forehead on them, in her typical display of contemplation. Kakashi nodded in agreement, before speaking. It seems that Jiraiya was tampering with forces he really should have been more careful with. We don't know the specifics of what happened, other than what was listed in that diary. But one thing's for sure, that kid isn't completely Naruto anymore. Tsunade murmured in agreement, before looking up and back at him. Yeah, this is just, she let out a deep sigh, as her voice began to waver. She turned her attention back to the book, flipping through the series of pages with Jiraiya's neat and quickly written scribbles. She turned back to the last page of writing that she had read, and looked it over again. Naruto unresponsive. Taking to hospital now. Very bad feeling, she repeated to herself before looking through the rest of the book. From what she could see, the rest was empty, save for a few blood-soaked pages towards the end. So, she said firmly, looking back up at Kakashi. You ran into Naruto. But are you really sure that it's him? This person could have simply stumbled upon Jiraiya's notebook while traveling. After all, we looked and looked and looked and could never find it, no matter where we checked. It wasn't on his body when the hidden stone found it, so it's possible he was looted before being discovered. Even saying it out loud didn't make sense. She knew that it was him, she could just tell. It was a gut feeling. My lady, Sakura replied, there's no doubt about it. That was Naruto. The Hokage nodded, before looking back down at her desk and thought. What did he look like? Did he match the description the hidden sand gave us before I sent you on your way? Kakashi spoke again. The description was mostly accurate. However, the strange gashes in his body that seemed to be very deep and very wide weren't actually gashes at all. They were tears in the skin, and the Kyuubi's chakra was seeping out of it. It's a wonder his body is still held together, after all this time. Neji nodded. He even said that his body was like a puppet, one that he was forced to inhabit. Tsunade smirked, still staring off into space. Now why does that sound so familiar? She leaned up, and barked a few names. Boar, Weasel. 2 Anbu Black Ops members seemingly appeared out of nowhere in the middle of the room, much to the surprise of Hinata, who was standing sheepishly in the corner. Yes, Lady Hokage? Have there been any recent developments in the hunt for Orochimaru and Sasuke? Sakura's breath hitched at the mention of her former teammate, but she shook it off and stared at the 2 Anbu with anticipation. Please let there be news. Please. Sorry, ma'am. Without Master Jiraiya's rather comprehensive spy network, I'm sorry to report that we have received no news from any of our field operatives as to the location or condition of the Uchiha boy and Orochimaru. Very well. You are dismissed. She ran her fingers through her hair, looking down at the desk again, as the 2 masked shinobi bowed and vanished as quickly as they had arrived. Damn, I was hoping we would have a lead on them. Maybe if we ran into them somehow. She trailed off, quickly losing faith in the plan before she even finished coming up with it. Milady, Sakura began again, one thing's for sure. From what I could see of his body, he doesn't look living. She grimaced as the image of his pale, lifeless flesh came to mind again. Suddenly, the slug princess stood up, sending her chair flying back and bumping into the rear wall. She leaned over onto her desk, then turned around and walked to the large glass windows that garnished the rear of her office, giving her a decent view of the village she swore to protect. Several heartbeats passed. Finally, she spoke, her back still facing the shinobi awaiting her orders. Sakura, I want you to take the journal to Shikamaru and try and find any hidden meanings or clues that might allude to more information on Naruto's condition. Jiraiya was always a tricky one. I'll bet there's some other secrets in there that we haven't found yet. Kakashi, I want you and Guy to gather a task force to try and determine how much of a threat that he might have become since leaving the village. I grant you full access to the Leaf's library and records. Spare no expense. Neji and Lee, I want you to move out and try and find a copy of this mysterious sealing jutsu that Jiraiya used on Naruto. It could hold a clue as to why Naruto suffered the fate that he did. Take Asuma and Kurenai with you. She turned finally, before finishing her requests. Her eyes fell on Hinata. Hinata, I want you to meet up with anyone that Naruto had a deep personal connection with, and interview them. Try to find out what might have caused this sudden change in his loyalties. Start with Iruka and Konohamaru. I'm sure they have quite a bit of knowledge of the inner workings of his mind. She paused, letting out a sigh, before continuing. Naruto's apartment has been untouched since his departure from the Leaf Village 3 years ago. I want you to also go through his belongings, and see if you can find anything that may help with the cause. Hinata just looked at her for a moment, trying to mentally process the information she had just received. Finally, she nodded, and clenched her fists. Everyone else in the room murmured in agreement, and took off on their various missions. Shizune, who hadn't moved since Kakashi's team reported back, finally spoke. My lady, are you sure you aren't overextending yourself? I mean, Naruto is a missing nin now. There's nothing we can do for him. Tsunade slowly turned, and glared at her assistant, who immediately paled and took a step back. I am sorry, I just think that devoting this many village resources to finding out what happened. Enough. I don't want to hear another word, Shizune, barked the blonde bombshell. Something happened to him, something big. He wouldn't just abandon his home, his dreams, for kicks. That's not the Naruto I know. She turned back to her desk, fished for her chair behind her with her right hand, and sat back down again. Something that can consume even the most stubborn of kids like that should never be taken lightly. Hinata left the Hokage tower slowly and silently. After walking out into the late afternoon sunshine, she sighed, and looked around for a moment. Armies of shopkeepers and customers were frantically trying to get in their last sales of the day before the sun went down completely, and she smiled before starting down the street, navigating between the groups of children that were running around, chasing each other, and the families that were out shopping as a unit before going home and relaxing for the evening, together. Hinata thought about the family she had at home, and grimaced slightly to herself. She fully expected a lecture on her performance on the Case Cage rescue mission from her father when she returned, and was prepared to have him call her a failure and unfit for the position of clan heiress once more. Every time she heard him say those words to her, she felt a little bit of her soul get crushed out of her, and her confidence wavered more and more by the day. But all she had to do was remember what Naruto had shown her, during the Chunin exams, during their short time together as fellow shinobi of the Leaf, and she was able to cope that much more with the mental torment her father put her through on a daily basis. Luckily, she had her sister, Hanabi, to help comfort her after a particularly venomous tongue lashing, but as her father's discontent with her increased, his faith in his other daughter only grew. So as time went on, her sister became more and more busy and withdrawn, as their father trained her to be the competent heiress the Hyuga needed. No, she slammed her heels into the dirt path in front of her, and realized that she had been so lost in her thoughts and emotions that she had nearly walked to the front gates of the village. She looked around, and noticed that most people had begun to go inside for the night, and she soon found herself alone in the slowly darkening twilight. There was a slight click, and all around her dozens of street lamps buzzed to life, humming with a stable and calming conviction. She turned slightly, and began off in the direction of Naruto's old apartment. No. She had to stay strong, to remain steadfast, to achieve her goals, and lead their clan out of the bigoted slump that it had fallen into many years before. What would mother have wanted? Hinata found herself this question with increasing frequency, and smiled. The fact that her mother had been the way she was, in the position of power that she held as wife of the Hyuga clan leader, and held beliefs similar to Hinata's, gave her hope, and pride that there were some among the Hyuga that had the right idea. It would be hard, and a constant uphill struggle, but she would try her best. She had to. Something on your mind? Hinata jumped out of her skin, and looked up from the ground she had been staring at since she set off. To her surprise, her legs had taken her right up the front step of Naruto's old apartment building and to the entrance to his room, where another person was already sitting, leaning against the door, looking at her with concerned and caring eyes. Oh, Iruka-sensei. Good evening. The scar-nosed Chunin watched her approach, and sighed with a smile. Want to talk? Hinata looked at the ground again as her old academy instructor got to his feet, unsure of how to even begin. After waiting for a response and not getting one, Iruka continued on softly. I come up here to think sometimes, about all the things I could have done differently, about all the things that I still have an opportunity to do as a person in this village. It's not the most glamorous view in the world. He motioned at the wall across from Naruto's door, but it certainly gets me thinking. Iruka sighed slightly, and turned to look at Hinata, who had begun to fidget with her fingers again. I still miss him every day. Hinata jumped at the sudden change of topic, but nodded in agreement after she realized she had been completely motionless and silent since greeting the man several moments ago. She put her hand in her pocket, and fished out a small, worn, metal key. At the sight of this, Iruka frowned, and took a step back. Oh, you must be here by orders from the Hokage. She's the only one I know of that has a key to his place. I wouldn't want to get in your way. He turned, and as he began to take his first step towards the exit, Hinata finally worked up the nerve to say something. Wait. Iruka froze, and turned back to the ivory-eyed girl. It's actually good that I ran into you here. I need tea to talk to you as well, Iruka-sensei. It was barely a hair over a whisper, but Iruka still got the message, and frowned questioningly. She put the key in the door, and it opened with a loud squeak. She took a deep breath, and pushed forward into the musky living room. Dust had accumulated on everything in the 3 years since it had last been opened, and Hinata broke out into a coughing fit as soon as she began to wander around absent-mindedly, looking for a light switch. She heard coughing coming from behind her, and turned to see Ruka's face sticking through the doorway. "May I come in?" he asked with a smile. She nodded again, before finding a lamp on an end table and throwing the switch. The entire room was immediately bathed in a warm yellow glow, and dust particles floated through the light like ships in a foggy bay. She heard the door close behind her, and sighed quietly. The apartment was certainly tiny, but it wasn't something that she thought was particularly bad. In fact, she found it rather cozy and inviting, after it had gone through a little bit of cleaning, that is. To the far right side of the living room was a small kitchen and dining table, where a few unopened packages of instant ramen lay buried in a sea of dust. She made her way towards the kitchen, and began to slowly and absent-mindedly open the cabinets and drawers, as if trying to find something in particular. "It's been a little over 2 years now, hasn't it?" Expecting this question, Hinata didn't flinch at all, and instead slowly moved towards and sat down on one of the chairs in the living area. She nodded expressionlessly, and stared at point where the wall and the floor met in front of her. "Something happened, didn't it?" This time, the phrase came out as more of a statement rather than a question. "That's why you had the key, and why you came here." He took the chair next to hers, and looked at her with a worried expression on his face. She knew that Iruka was like a father to Naruto, and that his influence in the boys' academy days helped stave off the darkness of being alone, and kept him off a more dangerous path. So she determined that it was in her best interest, and Naruto's best interest, to tell the man everything she knew. Now if only she could speak without working herself up too much. Iruka watched her quizzically. Hinata had always been a shy one, so he made sure not to pressure her too much. But still, he could tell just by the aura she was giving off that something did indeed happen, and if it concerned Naruto, then, well, he needed to know. Naruto, she began, then stopped, re-evaluating her decision to let Iruka in on an S-ranked secret. But Tsunade did tell her to speak with Iruka on matters revolving around Naruto, and since she was the one that made it an S-ranked secret to begin with, she pressed on. He's alive. Shikaku Nara grumbled a little bit, resting his chin on his left hand and muttered something under his breath about missing dinner with his family. The strategist looked around the room at the handful of people around him, trying to figure out why he had been summoned. There were 3 other people in the room, which was the council chambers at the base of the Hokage Tower. The large round table in the middle was more than large enough to hold them all, but Shikaku still felt it a bit strange they were using such a large room in such a distinguished place for this meeting. The chambers were lit weakly by a few small lights on the far walls, and a small chandelier that hung from the high ceiling over the wooden table they were all currently sitting at. To his right sat his old teammate Inoichi. The blonde-haired interrogation specialist eyed him bemusedly from his seat. 3 seats to his left was an Anbu captain, something that had immediately begun setting alarm bells off in Shikaku's head when he walked into the room. Just what is this meeting about, anyways? Sitting directly across from him at the table was the Hokage's right-hand man. Well, woman, actually. Shizune sat tensely, obviously waiting for other people to show up. That's odd. She typically doesn't get worked up about any old thing. If she's here, then that must mean something really serious is going down. Suddenly, the door burst open and in walked in a few additional people. Most notably was his own son, Shikamaru, who rolled his eyes upon seeing his father already waiting for him in the room. With his hands in his pockets, he worked his way around the table and took the seat to the left of his father. Behind him strolled in Anko, the rather vivacious Kunoichi on the interrogation team. Inoichi immediately groaned and put his head in his hands as she grinned widely and plopped down in the free seat next to him. "What's up, boss?" she smirked, lightly punching him in the shoulder. His head was still in his hands. Shikaku finally decided it was time to speak up. "Do any of you know why we've been summoned? As much as I love hanging out with colleagues after work, I prefer to do it at a sake bar over a game of shogi rather than in the council chambers on my day off." Shikamaru grunted, and muttered something with the word, troublesome, in it. Shikaku could almost hear his son rolling his eyes as he pressed his head into the table in front of him. The door opened again, and in came Guy, followed closely by the Hokage herself. This definitely got the attention of everyone in the room, at least, everyone in the room that hadn't been caught up to speed yet. Looks like we're just waiting for Kakashi, as usual, Guy quipped with a smile as he took a seat next to Shikamaru. Tsunade merrily grunted in agreement, and plunged down into the closest to the door, to the left of Shizune. I hate this place. Usually when I'm here I'm getting chewed out by a bunch of old geezers who think they can run this village from their living rooms. She crossed her arms, and leaned back before closing her eyes briefly. It only took 5 minutes instead of Kakashi's usual 90 for him to show up, another red flag, Shikaku thought. He poked his head in the door, giving his patented eye smile. Good, you're all here. He walked in, and looked over at the Anbu captain who hadn't moved since Shikaku had arrived. Tenzo, for this mission, you're going to need to pose as a typical Jonin instructor, so you might as well start by taking off the mask now. The man identified as Tenzo nodded, before reaching up and pulling the painted Anbu mask off his face, leaving behind a face protector with the Leaf Village emblem etched on the top. He placed the mask on the table, followed by his interlaced fingers, and leaned forward slightly. Shikaku raised an eyebrow, watching the Anbu operative slightly. He looked familiar, but he couldn't place it quite yet. Kakashi sat down to the right of Shizune, and pulled a few pieces of paper from his flak jacket. Now, I'm sure most of you are wondering why you're here. It's complicated, but this meeting was called to discuss Naruto Uzumaki. Inoichi frowned, his head no longer in his hands. Right to business, Shikaku smirked, observing his teammate closely. I'm sorry, did you just say Naruto Uzumaki? What's so important about a dead kid? Shizune winced at his blunt phrasing, before looking at the Hokage. Tsunade was leaning forward now as well, her face looking rather serious and contemplative. Finally, she spoke, as no one else seemed to want to continue. The Slug Princess countered Inoichi's harsh statement with one of her own, one that made everyone but Guy, Kakashi, and Shizune jump slightly. Naruto Uzumaki is still alive. What did you just say? Iruka jumped back in his chair slightly, a wide-eyed expression of doubt, terror, sadness, and glee clashing for real estate on his face. Hinata only winced, before nodding. We ran into him and another Akatsuki member in an attempt to rescue Lord Gaara. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it was strong and composed, something that Iruka was not expecting, considering the topic of conversation. Then, the weight of her words came crashing down on him. Wait, did you just say Akatsuki? Naruto joined up with the Akatsuki? Hinata shifted her gaze to the floor now, and nodded again. What? How? Where? When? But, Iruka's mind went into overdrive, and he was starting to burn himself out. He's not the kind, loving soul we remember him as, Sensei, Hinata said with a great deal of sadness in her voice. She could feel the tears in her eyes begin to well up as she went on. Something happened to him. Something's changed him. The look of shock on her face as she said this gave away that she, too, didn't believe it, and yet Iruka could tell that she saw him with her own 2 eyes. And if Hinata says it was him, then come hell or high water, it was him. Snapping out of it, Iruka saw the girl in front of her struggling emotionally, and, pushing his own emotions aside, donned the demeanor that he used so often in order to comfort troubled academy students. Why don't you start from the beginning? It could help let you process it yourself if you let it out, he suggested with a warm smile. Hinata nodded, sniffled, and to Iruka's surprise, smiled. Now I can see why Naruto trusted you so much, loved you so much, her voice was back to a whisper. But she didn't care. She was actually able to open up a little bit with her old teacher, and that was a very comforting feeling, to not have to struggle alone. Suddenly, Hinata realized something. Was this what Naruto had to endure for the majority of his life? This feeling of absolute dread, knowing that your pain and suffering began and ended with yourself? She froze, wide-eyed, as the realization hit her like a powerful wave. We were trying to stop the Akatsuki from kidnapping the case cage, she continued, fidgeting with her hands. When we ran into him and Sasori of the Red Sand. Sasori tried to attack the old woman that was with us at the time, but... A look of shock blitzed across her face again, and Naruto. Kyuubi, whatever that person calls himself now. He destroyed the puppets that Granny Chio summoned to fight against Sasori without even moving. Iruka, wide-eyed, stared down at Hinata. Kyuubi? What do you mean, whatever he calls himself now? Hinata looked back up at the wall, still weaving her index fingers around one another nervously. We called him NN Naruto, and he laughed like it was an old childhood N nickname. She sniffled again. He said his name was Kyuubi, but that person was definitely Naruto. Kyuubi, the Nine Tails. Iruka grunted in surprise. I can't believe that Naruto gave into that thing. I won't believe it. Hinata shook her head. And no, we don't think that's what happened, she stated, wiping her eyes off with her sleeve. Even though she had stopped crying, the buildup of tears had begun to annoy her and distort her vision. Not like she was staring at anything important anyway, just the wall and, occasionally, her fingers when she realized she was doing her nervous tick. Before he left, he threw an old book down to Kakashi-sensei. It was a training journal from Master Jiraiya, and it said that some sealing jutsu was cast upon the Nine Tails during their attempts to allow Naruto to tap into its chakra. Iruka clicked his tongue, and leaned back a bit. Well, it sounds to me like that's where everything went wrong, regardless of what Lord Jiraiya said happened. That old geezer was definitely a proud one, and probably wouldn't want to fess up to any mistakes. At least, not right away. He smirked, and frowned as he remembered the fate that befell the legendary Sannin. I suppose we'll never know now anyways. The Hyuga girl murmured in agreement, then jumped slightly, remembering why she was here. Alright, I was told to ask you if you might be able to tell me what could have caused Naruto to betray the hidden leaf so easily. That was also why I was sent here, in order to try and find information that might help us. Iruka grinned, and stood up. Well, you could probably use some help trudging through this garbage heap. Naruto wasn't ever one to keep a tidy and organized home, or life for that matter. He chuckled, remembering how flustered Naruto was in his academy days, especially in his efforts to master the basic clone jutsu. Hinata giggled to herself slightly as well, remembering all too well how her friend was in school and elsewhere. Thank you, Iruka-sensei, she said with a smile, before standing up as well. The Chunin instructor clapped his hands together and smiled. Okay, let's see here. He began to rummage through the cupboards, then smirked slightly. I'll bet you a month's pay that the crazy fool kept some inspiration for that jutsu of his around here somewhere. After Hinata laughed a little and blushed, he rubbed the back of his neck. I don't think those two realized how similar they were, no matter how much Naruto denied it. The Akatsuki? Shikamaru stared at the Hokage with a pale, almost sickly expression on his face. You can't be serious. I'm afraid so, she replied coldly. I honestly am just as surprised as all of you are. Shikaku placed his hands on the table in front of him. I see, he stated expressionlessly. He knew the sort of influence that Naruto had on his son, back before he left with Jiraiya. Shikamaru didn't typically like praising anyone, but the Jinchuriki was a one-time exception to that rule, something that Shikaku noticed immediately. To earn my son's praise, especially with the burden he carries, that is quite impressive. Kakashi rummaged through a few of the papers he had haphazardly tossed on the table in front of him, before picking one up and looking it over tersely and speaking again. Here's what we know so far. Master Jiraiya, during their training away from the village, introduced some sort of foreign seal to Naruto, in an attempt to allow him to safely and effortlessly draw upon the Nine Tails chakra as if it were his own. At least, Kakashi picked up another sheet of paper, with some scribbled notes jotted down on it. That's what we think, anyway. The journal that Jiraiya left behind didn't bother to identify this sealing jutsu, only that it was discovered somewhere along their journey, and that Jiraiya had to tinker with it in order to get it to work with the 8 trigram seal that Minato-sensei placed on Naruto back when the Nine Tails attack happened initially. Kakashi attempted to hide the grimace that dashed across the uncovered portion of his face, but failed. He had just called the 4th Hokage something unbefitting of his honor, and it was merely due to a slip of the tongue. Lord 4th's seal, however, we do have access to, Kakashi continued, attempting to rectify his mistake from before. Inoichi and Anko, you're here because after Master Jiraiya, the interrogation division of Anbu has the best knowledge of sealing jutsus. After the meeting is over, I want you two to look over the 8 trigram seal that was used on the Nine Tails, and try and find any noticeable weaknesses that could be exploited by using a second seal concurrently. Anko and Inoichi nodded, and began jotting down notes of their own. Now, as for the rest of the story, that's where we'd like Sakura and Shikamaru to come in. As soon as you can, Shikamaru, Kakashi turned his attention over to the Nara clan heir. I want you and Sakura to pore over the notebook that Naruto left us, and try and find any additional clues or messages that were hidden within it. It's not much to go on, but it's certainly a start. Tsunade interjected after Kakashi stopped to reorganize his papers again. Look for anything, frequency of letters, strange occurrences of numbers in places where there shouldn't be any, anything at all that looks suspicious. She narrowed her eyes, looking at the boy. Jiraiya was a crafty bastard, so be sure to be careful as well. Although I didn't see any from my quick flip-through of the journal, there could be something there that's dangerous. So be on your guard. Shikamaru nodded, completely serious now. I understand, Lady Hokage. When should I start? Well, I sent Sakura out to find you immediately after Kakashi and his team returned from their mission, she stated with a frown. But I didn't realize that Kakashi had already commissioned you for this task force as well. So meet up with her tomorrow, I'm sure she'll be looking for you. I understand, Shikamaru repeated, before looking back over at Kakashi, who seemed to have all of his ducks in a row once again. Right, hopefully we can use any information gleaned from this search to help aid us in the main purpose of this mission. To capture Naruto Uzumaki and bring him back to the leaf at all costs. More shocked looks from around the room. Even Tsunade seemed to have her doubts. I trust you know what you're doing, Kakashi. The copy nin nodded, before elaborating. If anything, his presence in the Akatsuki is a short one. If they are planning on using the tailed beasts as some kind of controllable weapon, Naruto might be betrayed in order to steal the 9 tails away from him. Even if he has unlocked the full power of the Biju, which from the look of things, he has. The Akatsuki are a criminal organization comprised of a dozen or so S-class mercenaries. I doubt even he could defend himself from them so easy. Confusion across the room, as Kakashi paused for a moment to let his words sink in a little. Especially with people like Itachi Uchiha in their ranks, who can most likely control the tailed beast inside him with his Sharingan capabilities. Therefore, it is in Naruto's best interest that we rescue him from the Akatsuki. He stopped again, and looked at his notes. Also, as much as I hate to admit it, there's the obvious fact that without a Jinchuriki, the Hidden Leaf Village is at a significant disadvantage compared to the other hidden villages. He looked over at Tsunade, who looked like she was about to angrily respond to Kakashi's blunt honesty, but he spoke up before she did. I know as much as you do, Lady Hokage, that Naruto, or any Jinchuriki for that matter, is not a weapon. They're people. But that won't stop other nations from trying to use the power vacancy to their advantage. I know that the Hidden Cloud Village has long since used Jinchuriki as excuses to antagonize other countries. Tsunade closed her mouth, and nodded, admitting that he was right. Alright then, what's the plan? Gaara fell onto the floor, hard. His lifeless body lay limp in the shadow of a massive multi-eyed statue, as a conglomeration of cloaked figures shimmered above him. Excellent work, everyone, announced the purple-eyed one. If it took that long for the One-Tails, I can't imagine how long it'll start to take for the rest, groaned a tall figure. On his back was a large 3-bladed scythe. I've been sitting on this rock for so long, my ass is starting to kill me. Shut up, Hidan, slammed a masked figure. The sooner we can capture and seal the tailed beasts, the sooner we can get out there and begin collecting more bounties. Our coffers are abysmal right now. No, you shut the hell up, Kakazu, roared Hidan. I'm sick and tired of you only ever giving a damn about money. Why don't you pull that giant stick out of your A? Silence, both of you, came the voice of the purple-eyed one again. The time for bounty hunting and leisure will be upon us soon enough. But for now, we need to focus on the task at hand. With the One-Tails sealed, we can begin our hunt for the other Jinchuriki. I would recommend skipping over the 2 tails, Lord Pain. A pair of Sharingan eyes pierced purple-ringed ones. The 2 tails and 8 tails Jinchuriki are both quite loyal to the Hidden Cloud, and both have reasonable control over their tailed beasts. To attack one would be to attack both. A roar of unadulterated laughter erupted in the cavern. That? You call that reasonable control? The Sharingan moved off of Pain and onto the shorter, crimson-eyed figure across the room. Oh, we're going to have to take them on at some point anyway, right? So why wait? The red-eyed boy cooed with his multi-layered voice. Are you volunteering, Kyuubi? Smirked a large shark-like figure. Even at your full power, I highly doubt you can take on the entirety of the Hidden Cloud, as well as 2 fully trained Jinchuriki. Kyuubi grinned back, revealing a set of white, wolf-like teeth. "Give me 3 days." And with that, he vanished. "Shikamaru? Shikamaru, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." The ponytailed boy turned his head lazily, hands still in pockets. "Oh, Sakura, I was told you were looking for me." It was now the next day, and the 2 of them were standing off to the side of the Leaf Village's largest market squares. Shikamaru was in the process of heading to the library to do some research of his own on seals and sealing jutsus, but welcomed the intrusion that meant he didn't have to do any real reading today. But honestly, he loved it. And especially now that he knew Naruto was on the line, he took it more seriously as well. Not that he'd ever let anyone know it. He yawned as the pink-haired Kunoichi ran up to him with a book in her hand. "Ah, so that's the book we're going to be going through then?" Sakura nodded, holding it up. "Yep, this is Master Jiraiya's training diary. It has a few entries about what the 2 of them had been working on together." She opened up to the first page, and looked it over again, as if to make sure the book she was carrying was the right one. After a few moments, she snapped it closed again, and looked back up at Shikamaru. "Right, where do you think we should go to do this?" "Probably somewhere quiet," she nearly shouted, looking around at the mob of people walking around her. The boy merrily nodded. "How about the library? I was headed there anyway." Before waiting for an answer, he began walking, and Sakura stayed hot on his heels. As the crowd around them began to recede, and they could finally start to hear birds chirping again, Shikamaru finally asked the question that had been troubling him since he met with the Naruto retrieval task force night before. "So, is it really him?" Sakura only murmured, before nodding once or twice. "Yeah, it was really kind of a surreal experience. We didn't realize it was him until he was right on top of us. To be honest, I'm surprised he didn't kill you," Shikamaru said bluntly, with a tinge of worry in his voice. "If what everyone is saying is true, then that means the seal probably failed, and whatever is controlling his body is most likely not Naruto." Sakura nodded. "Yeah, that's why I seriously think that part of Naruto still exists in there somewhere. We just have to find it and drag it out." She smiled, kicking and screaming, knowing Naruto. Shikamaru chuckled lightly. "Yeah, he certainly always has been troublesome." Shikamaru stopped for a moment, remembering something. "Wait, Sakura, there's someone else I want to bring along as well, if that's okay with you." "Oh, and who might that be?" came a voice from behind them. Sakura jumped, not sensing the presence of another person until after he spoke. Shikamaru just chuckled a little to himself and kept walking. "Kakashi-sensei, pleasure of you to join us." The Jonin simply smiled, and followed behind them. After they were joined by Kakashi, the time it took to reach the library seemed like a blink of an eye. Before they knew it, they had meandered their way into the library and through the maze of hallways and doors until they found what they were looking for. A large room in the far back of the library, embedded in the rock, with a pair of large, solitary windows in the back warmly illuminating the space with the embrace of the shining afternoon sun. The room was an impressive one. Each wall was covered in scrolls and parchments containing many important documents for the Leaf. Things like jutsu formulas, history of famous ninja, and crucial mission reports from years ago. Bookshelves stuck out from the walls in various places, expanding the surface area of knowledge that was laid out before them. In the center of the room were 2 medium-sized round tables, one of which was already occupied by reading shinobi. Upon their entrance, however, the ninja took their leave, after noticing Kakashi among the new arrivals. Sakura glanced over at her sensei with a quizzical look on her face, and he only shrugged. "Well, I was told that this room had been reserved for us." After the 3 took their seats next to one another at one of the tables, Sakura placed the journal in front of them. But Shikamaru looked over at Kakashi instead. "I trust you brought the books I asked for you to bring?" he asked politely, and Kakashi smiled and reached around to the pouch on his waist. He pulled out a series of books, each a different pastel color, and laid them on the table beside the notebook. Sakura's sweat dropped when she recognized the titles. "The Icha Icha series? Really, Shikamaru?" The boy smiled slightly and nodded at Kakashi. "Yeah, I figured that if we were going to be looking for clues in Jiraiya's writing, it would be a good idea to have some additional examples on hand." Then he frowned, and stood up suddenly. "Although it would look like you're missing one, Kakashi-sensei." Kakashi looked up with an alarmed expression on his face. No, I brought my entire collection. I have them all. If Master Jiraiya had released another sequel, I would have heard about it. Shikamaru laughed to himself a little, stood up, and walked to the far wall of the room. After looking through the series of books on the shelf, he finally found what he was looking for, grabbed it, and walked back to the table. Tales of a Gutsy Ninja? Sakura asked, upon picking up the brown book that Shikamaru had tossed in front of them. What's this for? That was Master Jiraiya's first book, and a rather important one, he replied with a sly smile. For a lot of reasons. Then why haven't I heard of it? Inquired the girl, after flipping it to a random page and reading the first few lines. Wait, Naruto? Was this book written about Naruto? Kakashi, after recovering from the shock of potentially missing a new Icha book's release, looked over at what Sakura was holding, and smiled. Ah, I remember now. No, Sakura, it was actually the other way around. After seeing the quizzical looks on both the Chunins' faces, Kakashi sighed, and placed his hands on the table. I shouldn't really say much more than that. Wait, does that mean that you knew who Naruto's parents were? Shikamaru asked, shocked. Why haven't you said anything before now? Because it's still considered an S-ranked secret in the Hidden Leaf, one that is punishable by death if revealed. Not even I can reveal it without facing the consequences. Kakashi sighed, adjusted his forehead protector, and leaned back in the chair, crossing his arms. Although I do have to admit that not many people know their true identity. Kakashi fell silent, and Shikamaru accepted the fact that they weren't going to be getting any more information out of the white-haired ninja for the time being. Very well then, I say we start working on the task at hand then, wouldn't you agree? Sakura nodded, still frowning from being kept in the dark. Kakashi gave an eye smile, and Shikamaru murmured to himself as he opened to the first page of the journal, and began to read. It wasn't a particularly pleasant day in the hidden cloud village. The winds had picked up as they whipped through the mountains, rattling windows and forcing many people inside after only a few hours. This, of course, didn't stop the Raikage, from storming out into the training grounds on the outskirts of the village in order to scold his younger brother. After seeing the furious village patriarch approach, Killer B gulped, and attempted to hide behind a series of rocks on the far side of the mesa he was training at. After a few moments of silence, B let out a sigh, and rapped to himself internally. That was a close one, Gyuki. I wonder what my big brother wants with me. Would you stop playing around? Go talk to him. Hiding from him will only make him angrier, replied the exasperated Eight Tails. As if on cue, the mound of rocks that B was hiding behind exploded in a blast of pure strength, revealing a furious Raikage. B, what the hell do you think you're doing? Roared the shirtless man. His body was crackling with lightning, and his eyes bored into his brother's. Oh, hey big bro. How you doing? I'm just here trying to keep my skills from falling to ruin, answered B with a cheeky smile. This only seemed to infuriate the man even further. I told you to stay inside. Someone out there is hunting Jinchuriki. The cage has already been captured. This will not happen to you and Yugito. I forbid it. B gulped, and scratched the back of his head. Oh, right, I forgot about that. How about I go ahead and rejoin that cat? A grumbled, and turned around, satisfied that his brother had finally gotten the message. But he stopped dead in his tracks when he saw a black-cloaked boy standing in front of him, grinning wildly, with a crazed look in his eye. B gulped again. He hadn't sensed the approach of this child at all. B, you need to get out of here. Now. This was the most serious that B had ever heard Gyuki be. That boy, that's, who the hell are you? Shouted the Raikage, as his body became completely engulfed in crackling bolts of lightning. This only made the boy smile wider, as a demonic laugh escaped his lips and rang out around the clearing. Who I am is not important. What's important is that you come with me, Eight Tails, stated the boy, in a voice that seemed to take on the properties of two different tones. B shivered upon hearing the child talk, and took a step back. B, that's the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. And from the looks of things, he isn't alive. That child isn't in control anymore. You have to move. You can't win this. How wrong you are, smirked the boy. B jumped. I was talking to Gyuki, inside my own head. How in the world? Although you were right about the second part. You can't win this. Give up now, or I'll destroy your entire village. The crazed look in Kyuubi's eye became a serious one, as he stared the furious Raikage in the eye. Do we have a deal? Akatsuki, how dare you? Barked A, and he lunged forward at a speed unmatched by any shinobi in the entire world. Or so he thought. The boy simply stepped to the side, hands behind his back, and turned to look at the disorientated man that now stood behind him. I see, so that's your answer then. Kyuubi chuckled to himself, and looked up at B with a gaze that chilled his soul. I warned you. Kyuubi. Wait, what are you doing? Came Yuki's voice from B's mouth. Why are you working for those fools? They're using you. Whatever the Akatsuki have told you, it's a lie. I thought you were smarter than this. Kyuubi let out a roar of laughter, one that was inhuman. After a few moments, he tilted his head at B and spoke softly. Oh, I know all about the Akatsuki's plans for us tailed beasts. And you know what? I don't care. This world is nothing to me, and none of its people concern me in the slightest. He turned, and began walking over to where the Raikage was still fuming, having not moved since failing his attack on the cloaked boy in front of him. Or rather, semi-cloaked. His robes were tattered and mangled, much like his body. What the hell is this kid? What have the Akatsuki done to him? This is unforgivable, fumed A, how dare they do this to a child? Oh my, grinned Kyuubi. Your hatred is rather pungent. If I wasn't going to kill you now, I'd almost be willing to keep you around, because it is intoxicating. His eyes widened as he approached the man. It's a shame, really. Hatred is the purest emotion, and it cleanses the soul. Each subtle clack of the boy's sandals on the rocky surface of the mountaintop rattled the earth, and red, violent chakra began leaking out from around him, swirling in a vortex on the ground at his feet. Learning to capitalize on that, and feed it, is a great strength. The loose rocks on the ground began to rattle, then bounce, then fly into the air, following the current of chakra that began to wrap around the boy like a tornado. Blood-red power surged around him, flowing up into the sky, which was rapidly darkening and swirling as well. The winds that had been so bad earlier completely stopped, and began to circulate around with the flow of chakra, increasing with intensity after each passing second. The Raikage just stood there, watching the tremendous amount of power being exhibited before him with a look of anger. A look of disgust, a look of fear. I wonder which I shall destroy first, cooed the child from within the vortex, still approaching the man standing before him. The Raikage, or the precious village he strives to protect from the likes of me. He donned a look of mock hurt. Oh, is that fear I'm sensing? How pitiful. He screamed the last word, and a massive surge of chakra exploded out of him, making his entire body glow and his orange hair blow upwards, seemingly away from the flames that had ignited in his eyes. From the perspective of the village below them, it looked like a giant orange-red beam of light had descended around the training grounds that everyone knew Lord Killer B frequented. No one had really thought anything of it, until the clouds above them began to circulate and spiral around the beam as well, darkening the sky to a light level that began to worry the village elite. Yugito Ni looked up from her scroll on advanced fire-style ninjutsu and glanced out her apartment window. That's odd. I don't remember seeing storm clouds developing in the sky earlier this morning when I went for my walk. A crackle of lightning blitzed across the sky, and Yugito grimaced. What is that Raikage doing now? He knows it's not safe to practice his lightning-style attacks within the village walls. Then Yugito sensed that the Nibi inside of her was growing restless. Descending into her mindscape, she approached the demon cat with a worried expression on her face. Is there something wrong, Matabi? This chakra, muttered the beast, looking around frantically. Finally, she realized that her Jinchuriki was before her, and stared at her with an expression that Yugito had never seen the Nibi wear before. It was fear. Kitten, you need to leave immediately. It's not safe here. That power. Matabi was cut off when a massive surge of chakra rocketed outwards in all directions, which forced Yugito back out into the real world. She leaned out her window completely and gaped at what she saw. A massive beam of red chakra was orbiting around the near side of B's training grounds, swirling like a tornado. What is that? Kitten, you must leave now, shouted Matabi. For both our sakes. That chakra, it's Kurama. Yugito was now thoroughly worried. Nothing ever scared her tailed beast, not even her more vibrant sparring sessions with Lord B. Kurama? She asked. Who's that? The Nine Tails. I don't know why he's here, but this is bad. He's amassing so much chakra. Another blast of power burst from the base of the Tower of Light, and a large purple orb began to form in the sky, absorbing the chakra that flowed over it. Yugito began to feel sick. This was bad. She didn't have to have Nibby explain it to her. It's too late, kitten, cried Nibby from inside of her. Hold on, I'll do what I can to spare our lives. She closed her eyes as chakra leaked out of her body, enveloping her in a cocoon of energy. B, you need to run. Now, shouted Gyuki. If that tailed beast bomb hits us from this distance, we won't survive. Tailed beast bomb, you say? Murmured B. But that would mean, yes, now run. A few yards away, the wreckage was quaking in his boots. The demon boy was still approaching him, slowly but surely, and cackling with glee. You are your village. You are your village? He kept repeating, as the mass of purple energy surged ever larger. I looked up at the orb, which was now the size of a city block. Suddenly, the boy stopped, with a surprised expression on his face. I've got it, he exclaimed. He leaned forward, and stared the wreckage dead in the eyes with his cold, hardened, lifeless gaze. I'll just destroy both at once. And he threw the orb. Sakura sat down again, after having gotten up to leaf through some scrolls on cryptography and hidden messages. Kakashi had picked up one of his Icha Icha books with good intentions, but got engrossed in the story and began reading it again. Shikamaru, however, was leafing through the empty pages of the journal, hoping to find some clues or other indications of additional writing that was hidden away. A heartbeat. Sakura leaned over to grab a pen and paper to jot some notes down from her reading earlier, when she noticed her sensei drop his book. It fell from his unmoved hand, bounced off the edge of the table, and landed in a crumpled heap on the floor, pages bent and askew. What she saw next sent shivers down her spine. Kakashi's visible eye was wide open, a look of terror across his unexposed face. He was shaking slightly, but his hand was still up in front of his face, like he was still reading. But he was staring instead out the window and into the village before them. Shikamaru had noticed the book's tragic fate as well, and was also now staring at Kakashi with a worried expression on his face. Kakashi-sensei? Another heartbeat. What just happened? Kakashi whispered. Sakura shivered. She had never seen her sensei this worried before. Kakashi-sen. Shikamaru's repeated question was interrupted by a mild earthquake. It rattled the glass in the library, and reverberated through the walls, shaking loose dozens of books and scrolls from the walls around them. The tremors lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to cause a small amount of damage to the fragile glass panes on the wall. A large crack ran down each, like lightning bolts. Sakura got up to replace the books on the shelves, while neither Kakashi nor Shikamaru moved. Kakashi was still frozen and shaking, while Shikamaru was still watching him, trying to get him to explain what was wrong. Kakashi-sensei? Hello? Are you okay? The ponytailed boy snapped his fingers in front of the Jonin's face a few times, trying to snap him out of it. Kakashi-sensei? The copy nin closed his eye, and let out a deep sigh, looking down at the ground. After a few moments, he looked back up again, eyes still closed, and stood up. Something just happened. I don't know what, but something big, and very bad, just happened. Wait a second. What is it, Shikamaru? Did you find something? Idly flipping through the pages of Jiraiya's journal, something had caught the eye of the Nara boy. It had been at least 3 hours since the strange earthquake incident, and although he hated to admit it, Kakashi had determined that it was in his best interest to stay and help the two Chunin try to decode whatever hidden messages that could reside within the book. At least, until he was instructed otherwise. In the meantime, however, the copy nin's attention drifted back to his favorite Icha Icha novel, and was engrossed in a rather heated chapter when Shikamaru spoke up. Find anything interesting, Shikamaru? The boy rolled his eyes and flipped open the journal. In front of him was a scroll on intermediate sealing jutsus. He had found the scroll on the ground after the earthquake had dislodged it earlier, and it had rather piqued his interest. One section of the document had caught his eye. What do we know about sealing jutsus? Shikamaru asked rhetorically. After flipping past the last page of writing and moving through the empty pages in the book, he stopped on the 2 blood-soaked pages towards the back. Kakashi blinked, and set his book down. Well then, from the tone in his voice, I think he thinks he's cracked it. Humorous, said a very annoyed Sakura. Just spit it out already. We're on the clock here. Shikamaru sighed, muttered, troublesome, and set the book down, still open to the 2 blood-soaked pages. He took his index finger, channeled a little chakra into the end, and touched the first red page. To the surprise of both Sakura and Kakashi, a faint seal glowed from within the bloody mess. What? How? Sakura said, obviously flabbergasted. She had spent 20 minutes earlier trying to find anything within those very same pages. See, you should have let me finish, grumbled Shikamaru, before taking his finger off of the page. Sealing jutsus are unique, in that they typically use blood and chakra-infused ink to work. He then pointed to the scroll he was referencing. It's actually possible to only use blood for the writing, although it requires a significantly higher amount of chakra to work. Sakura still looked confused. But wouldn't the rest of the blood on the page ruin the seal once it was saturated? Not necessarily. As long as the seal was formed first, you could theoretically write all over it and it wouldn't matter. A little more blood on top does a good job at hiding the seal, and making it harder to find. Huh. Sakura leaned back in her chair, frowning, still thinking. Well, alright then. What kind of seal was that? Shikamaru pressed his finger back down on the paper, and this time took note of the shape and size of the seal. Unfortunately, I have no idea. I do, Kakashi smiled, leaning forward. As a matter of fact, I know that exact seal quite well. I wonder who got a hold of instructions to Minato-sensei's memory seal. Memory seal? Shikamaru and Sakura both looked up at the Jonin. Kakashi nodded. Oh yes. It's quite easy to make, but requires quite a bit of chakra. It allows people to store their memories down on paper, granting them the ability to physically store their thoughts, emotions, feelings, and sensations in the real world. But how do you know about all of this? You mentioned a Minato-sensei? Sakura cocked an eyebrow. Oh, of course, silly of me to think you would know of Minato by that name. You probably are more familiar with his job title, 4th Hokage, smiled Kakashi. Sakura gasped, looking back at the seal. The 4th Hokage? Shikamaru looked up with a look of mild surprise. I thought that name sounded familiar. The copy nin nodded. Yep, he was my Jonin instructor back when I was still a freshly recruited shinobi. Haven't I told you this already? He frowned, looked down quizzically, thinking to himself. Sakura's sweat dropped. No, I'm pretty sure I would have remembered something as important as the 4th Hokage being your sensei, Kakashi-sensei, she stated sarcastically. Yeah, sorry about that. Kakashi smiled weakly, before regaining his composure slightly. Sensei used this jutsu to help train us whenever he had to go out on solo missions in the war, and he stayed back in the village. It was marked as a forbidden technique due to the astronomical chakra requirements in order to store memories longer than a few seconds. Astronomical chakra requirements that someone, say, with a tailed beast and Uzumaki blood would be able to meet quite easily, remarked Shikamaru. Kakashi smiled slightly and nodded. It would seem so. Although I have no idea how he could have learned it. The scroll is locked up in the Hokage's personal vault, along with many other forbidden jutsus. There's no way Naruto could have snuck back into the village undetected, then break into the vault and steal the scroll. Someone would have noticed him, or at the very least, the missing scroll during weekly vault inspections. Well, at least we know what it does. Is there any way to activate it, Kakashi-sensei? The Nara boy looked up from the intricate lettering of the slightly glowing seal, and glanced at the exposed eye of the white-haired shinobi. And should we activate it now? Shouldn't we wait for the Hokage to be here as well before we release the seal? Kakashi shook his head, still smiling. That's the genius of this jutsu. It can be replayed dozens of times before the seal begins to fade. And personally, with everything that's been going on around here, I don't think we should bother the Hokage with something that we aren't sure is even valuable. It is in our best interest to view the contents of the seal first, validate their importance, then report to Lady Hokage for her to look it over as well. I can understand that, nodded Shikamaru, before he rolled up the scroll and set it aside. Is there anything in particular we need to do to prepare for this? And what does it feel like? Squirmed Sakura. She was really hoping it wasn't going to make her nauseous. Don't worry, you too, smirked Kakashi. All you have to do is touch the center of the seal, and it'll start to play back its contents to everyone within a 5-foot radius. And it just feels like you're looking through someone else's eyes for a while, that's all, Sakura. He then gave an eye smile. Although it is a bit weird to hear someone else's thoughts in your head, and a voice that isn't your own speaking. Sakura gulped. I should have brought some motion sickness tablets, she thought to herself, before sitting up straight and nodding. Alright then, I'm ready. Shikamaru sighed, and pressed his index finger into the swirl pattern in the middle of the seal. Here goes nothing. A pair of eyes opened and closed groggily a few times, and two arms stretched out in front of them. A stifled yawn echoed through the small tent the person was in, followed by the two hands moving up and scratching the eyes feverishly for a moment. Oi, Naruto, get up. We have a long day of traveling and training to get through today. Whoa. Is that Master Jiraiya? Shikamaru marveled, as he let the sights and sounds of Naruto's memory wash over him. Yeah, looks like it. This must be from when they were on their training trip, before everything started to happen, replied Kakashi casually. Whoa, mumbled Sakura, still in awe of the feeling she was experiencing, reliving someone else's memories. Yeah, that's what you said yesterday. Training this, traveling that. I bet all we're gonna do today is race off to another hot springs so you can spy on more women for that smut you call books, you damn pervert. Naruto's voice made Sakura's heart stop for a moment. It was just as she remembered it, loud, bombastic, and littered with profanity. She smiled to herself, well aware that the other two couldn't see her. They were too busy experiencing the same moments as well. You fool! You dare antagonize the great toad sage Jiraiya? And this early in the morning? I'm starting to think you don't want me to train you for the next 2.5 years. Naruto grumbled to himself. Alright, fine. But you had better teach me something badass, you damn pervy sage. Naruto pulled back the tent door, and stepped out into the sunlight. They were situated under a series of tall trees, off the trail a few hundred feet. Jiraiya was standing in front of him, already dressed, glaring at the boy. Naruto rolled his eyes, and reached back into his tent for his trademark orange jumpsuit and pants. He quickly threw them on, pulled out a storage scroll, and resealed his tent inside of it. Oh, I have something very special planned for today, grinned Jiraiya mischievously. No women, shouted Naruto angrily. It was obvious that this was something Naruto had to deal with on a frequent basis. Jiraiya winced, and frowned. Fine, but we do have to get a move on. I want to make it to the next town before lunchtime. I've heard they have a tremendous archive of old sealing jutsus and scrolls. That would certainly help in my search to figure out how to let you tap into the Nine Tails chakra safely. Naruto nodded, before yawning again. Yeah, I hope we find something. We've been looking for almost 2 months now. I'm starting to think that we'll never find anything. I'm never going to get strong enough to fight off the Akatsuki at this rate, he thought to himself with a frown. Now that's ironic, quipped Shikamaru. Sensing Naruto's doubts, Jiraiya grinned widely. This is it for sure. I know it is. It has to be. We'll find something. And until then, I want you to keep working on your chakra control and shadow clone techniques. You can certainly improve on what you already know. His sweat dropped. Kami knows your shadow clone techniques are crap. Hey, they've worked great for me so far, shouted Naruto. So what if I just make a ton and send them into battle? If it gets the job done, then what does it matter? Jiraiya conked the Jinchuriki on the head. You idiot, it won't just get the job done with the Akatsuki. You'll need to formulate a plan and be tactical when fighting them, or you'll die. Naruto sighed again, rubbing his head. Ow. Alright, fine, what should I do first? The memory began to fade to black. Well, that was worthless, Shikamaru grumbled. Kakashi-sensei did say that it required a massive amount of chakra to make one of these seals. Maybe he didn't have enough when he made these, wondered Sakura. Quiet, both of you. There's more, stated Kakashi. Another memory faded into view, this time, of a small village's marketplace. Naruto was following close behind Jiraiya as they navigated through the swarms of people shopping. Where's that library? I was told it would be right off the market square. Grouched Jiraiya, above all the noise and commotion around them. This must be the village they were talking about in the previous memory, mused Shikamaru. Hey, pervy sage, is that it? Naruto pointed off to the left, down a small alleyway. A man had recently walked out of a small building at the end, and he had just barely caught a glimpse of a large array of bookshelves filled with scrolls behind him before the door closed. Aha, that's it all right, exclaimed the Sannin, as they made their way through the crowd. After walking into the room, Naruto was immediately hit with the smell of old parchment and aged leather, the quintessential scent of a well-frequented library. Wow, gaped Sakura. I can actually smell what it felt like to be there. Kakashi murmured in agreement. Yeah, this jutsu is pretty incredible. Naruto yawned, and immediately began to seek out a chair. After finding a nice comfy one in the back corner, nestled between a few rows of bookshelves, Jiraiya piped up. Oh no you don't. You're not just gonna sit and lounge around all day while I'm working, the Toad Sage announced, pulling a small pebble from his pocket. You're gonna practice your chakra control all day until you get it right. He tossed the stone to Naruto, whose sweat dropped and looked up at his master. Again? Really? I don't think I can take much more of this. He sat down in the chair, placed the pebble on his forehead, and concentrated. After a few moments of holding the stone to his face, he moved his hand away, and the pebble stuck. How long do I have to hold this for, you old pervert? Naruto grumbled. After not receiving a response, he began looking around at the various scrolls and parchments that surrounded him, and the rest of the building. Pretty soon after, he began to feel drowsy, and as the memory began to fade, the pebble fell from his forehead and bounced on the ground. The next memory began immediately after the previous, and it started with the loud roar of Jiraiya in Naruto's face. You fool! I told you to sit and hold that pebble on your forehead all day. You can't just slack off like that. Naruto sighed and crossed his arms angrily. You call this training? I have been doing the same dumb exercise for the past week. I can't take it anymore. If that pebble's on my forehead for another minute, it's gonna start growing into my face. He was still sitting on the large armchair from before, but this time there was a very angry white-haired man standing over him, holding a small scroll in his balled-up hand. Noticing the scroll, Naruto sat up and pointed at it. What's that? Did you find something? Seemingly forgetting the world of pain he was preparing his apprentice to descend into for breaking his instructions, Jiraiya sat up, and held it out in front of him with a cheeky grin. Oh, this? This is nothing. It's only the perfect sealing jutsu that will allow you to tap completely into Nine Tails chakra without breaking a sweat. What? You actually found something? Shouted Naruto. It was then that a rather attractive-looking librarian rounded the corner with a very annoyed expression on her face. Excuse me, gentlemen, but this is a library. I'd appreciate it if you would not scream in here like it's a playground. Oh, sorry, I'll tell my associate to keep it down. Jiraiya's half-baked apology froze up in his throat as he turned around and saw the beautiful woman in front of him. His ogling didn't last very long, however, because the librarian whacked the Sannin upside the head with the rather large book in her hand. I'll have you know that it was mostly you that was making the noise, sir. She frowned at him, and turned around. Pervert. Jiraiya immediately followed after her, trying to apologize, still yelling. Why did I have to get stuck with him? Why couldn't the legendary Sannin have some other, much cooler toad guy in it? Kakashi smiled to himself. It's funny, if Minato had been a few decades older. The next memory took them to a small wooded clearing, one that was significantly greener and more secluded than the first memories. Naruto was sitting down in the middle, feet stretched out, arms propping him up from behind. In front of him was Jiraiya, holding another scroll, and reading through it intently. Are you sure you figured it out? Groaned Naruto, obviously bored beyond comprehension. It's funny, I can feel his boredom through the memory, chuckled Shikamaru. Maybe if I learned this sealing jutsu, people would finally see how troublesome life is from my perspective. Shush, Sakura hissed, obviously still trying to pay attention to the memory. Yes, well, I think so, grinned Jiraiya from above the scroll. I had to modify this seal so that it wouldn't conflict with the 8 trigrams one you already have, so I had to rewrite some of it. But otherwise, it should do exactly as it was intended to do. What exactly does it do again? Naruto asked cheekily. Fool, why don't you ever listen to me when I talk to you? Bellowed the Toad Sage. What was that? Naruto grinned, obviously joking around at this point. Jiraiya's head seemed to heat up considerably, and Naruto could have sworn he heard a tea kettle whistling. Then, he let out a long sigh, and chuckled twice to himself. You really are a piece of work, you know that, kid? Smirked Jiraiya. Now, as I said before, this sealing jutsu is a special one. It was designed to help tame untamable wild beasts, such as the many large creatures that frequent this forest and the forest around the village we were just at. The clans there came up with this seal to incapacitate them. It is said to render the creature emotionless and in an almost brain-dead state, for as long as the seal lasts. Kakashi whistled. Well then, Jiraiya, I was right it seems. You were meddling with forces that were above even you. The Kyuubi isn't just some forest animal. But the Nine Tails isn't just a big-ass pig. Grumbled Naruto, as if he had heard Kakashi's comment. Imbecile, you think I don't know that? The Nine Tails is the most powerful of the tailed beasts. This will only incapacitate him slightly. But it should be enough time to draw out a considerable amount of his chakra, and store it elsewhere within you. Naruto nodded. He couldn't hope to ever understand the complicated details and various idiosyncrasies of the seal Jiraiya was talking about. But he could at least understand what to do once the seal was in place. Alright then, I'm ready whenever you are. He stood up, and took off his jacket and mesh shirt, exposing the pre-existing seal on his stomach. Jiraiya looked at him for a moment, then nodded too. Alright then, I'm only going to put the least powerful version of the seal in place, in case something goes wrong. We don't want to kill the Nine Tails. But I thought you said the Nine Tails couldn't die. Naruto said with a confused look on his face. He can't. Well, he can't die in the traditional sense. Jiraiya trailed off, before snapping back to reality, and laying the sealing scroll on the forest floor in front of him. Well, here goes nothing. Jiraiya extended his right hand, pulling his sleeve back to his elbow. A faint glow began to emanate from his fingertips, and small and convoluted symbols appeared down his arm. He took a step towards Naruto, and plunged his hand into the boy's stomach, directly on top of the 8 trigram seal. 4 points, untamed beast seal. He shouted, blasting Naruto back several yards and into a tree. His vision began to blur, and a hot, fiery burning sensation began to spread throughout his body. The memory went black for a moment, and the 3 ninja were sitting around the library table once again. 4 points. Untamed beast seal, muttered Kakashi, as he took a pen from his Jonin flak jacket and began scribbling on the blank page at the end of his Icha novel. At this point, the intel they were receiving from the memory seal was far more valuable than his book. Wait, yelled Sakura. I don't think it's over yet. This memory is hazy, but I can still see a faint outline. Kakashi nodded, before looking over at Shikamaru. I see it too. Shikamaru, channel some more chakra into the seal. This memory was weak to begin with. Doing as he was told, another memory filled their visions and they leaned back in their chairs again. Drip, drip. Naruto opened his eyes, and found himself laying several inches deep in a pool of water, in what looked to be a large, expansive sewer system. He smiled, and stood up, his clothes completely dry. Whoa, is this Naruto's subconscious mind? Sakura whispered. It's so dark and depressing. He began walking down the seemingly endless dark hallway. Although he didn't show it, he knew exactly where he was going. Naruto passed hallway after hallway, before stopping at one in particular. Even through the memory, Sakura could feel something dreadful around the corner. Something tainted, something evil. He turned, and continued walking. This time, however, he walked into a large, expansive room. Although there were no visible light sources, the entire cavernous room was lit with a gloomy glow that reflected off the moisture on the walls and the pool of water that was still coating the floor. What was most shocking, however, was the massive pair of golden gates in the middle of the room that expanded several dozen yards in all directions, even further in height. In the middle, there was a large metal clasp, covered by a slip of paper with the kanji for seal inscribed upon it. The back wall could not be seen from behind the gate, seemingly going on forever. The darkness quickly became the least unsettling thing in the room, as a pair of blood-red eyes and snow-white teeth punctured the onyx abyss with a snarl. What did you just do, you brat? Shouted the beast. Sakura jumped back in her chair, and nearly toppled over backwards. Was this the 9-tailed fox that had resided in the body of her teammate for all these years? Naruto only grinned, and put his hands behind his head. Nothing that concerns you, furball. I'm just taking what's rightfully mine. The beast roared, and jumped forward, lashing out past the gate with its claws, desperately trying to get at its jailer. But the seal held, as it always did, and Naruto stood tall before it, unflinching. You dare call me by such a name? I am the 9-tailed fox. You petulant brat, it bellowed, before moving completely into the light of Naruto's side of the room. Whoa, Naruto's had that thing inside of him this entire time? How did he not go completely insane? Gaped Shikamaru, parroting Sakura's thoughts. I don't know. I certainly wouldn't have been able to pull off being a Jinchuriki. Naruto is stronger than any of us realize, noted Kakashi. It looks just like it did on that fateful night. I can't believe it. So this is what Naruto had to live with for 14 years. The Nine Tails opened its mouth to continue berating the boy, when it suddenly went wide-eyed and fell backwards with a shriek. What have you done to me? It demanded, with a tinge of fear in its voice. Naruto was quick to pick up on it. Haha, take that, you stupid fox. He laughed, running up to the gate. Now give me your chakra. The fox stood up again and took another swing at Naruto, which forced him back again. It grabbed one of the bars as it fell again, this time into the gate itself. Naruto looked at the beast with a slight bit of worry, but also with a slight bit of glee. Say, Kyuubi, you don't look so good. Naruto was right. The recently thin and muscular anthropomorphic demon was quickly beginning to wrinkle and grow pale. Its once burnt orange fur began to pale as well. His eyes, however, continued to be as piercing and hate-filled as ever. You'll pay for this. You'll. Suddenly, the Nine Tails gasped, stood up again, and fell backwards with a shriek. And there it stayed, while Naruto watched on with curiosity and amazement. I can't believe the pervy sage's trick worked. That grouch is down for the count. Awesome. Naruto turned, and began to walk out of the room. As he turned, a small blue streak of chakra could be seen coming from Naruto's side, and leaking across the room, and into the cage. This went unnoticed by the boy. But not by his sensei. Wait a second, what was that? Did either of you two catch that just now? You mean that strange blue beam of chakra coming off of Naruto? Yeah, replied Sakura with a confused look on her face. She was still reeling over the fact she had just seen the Kyuubi, the real Kyuubi, in its true form, sealed away within the depths of Naruto's body. Looks troublesome to me, muttered Shikamaru, before continuing with the memory seal jutsu. Maybe that's what the chakra extraction process looks like. Naruto opened his eyes, and noticed he was back in the real world. With a very concerned Jiraiya hovering over him. Hey, kid, you alright? You took quite the smash into that tree there, he said, pointing in front of them. In the path Naruto had traveled after being launched, he had flown straight through a tree, causing it to splinter and split down the middle into a crumpled heap off to the side of the clearing. Naruto coughed once or twice, winced because of the pain in his ribs, and nodded. Yeah, I feel fine. And I think it worked. It shut the bastard up, that's for sure. Jiraiya felt relieved. Thank goodness for that. Honestly, I had no idea how the beast was going to react. He sighed, extended a hand to Naruto, and helped him up on his feet again. Yeah, I feel different now. Much better than before, that's for sure. And it's definitely a bonus that the old furball isn't antagonizing me every step of the way anymore, the boy grinned. I wonder what my chakra capacity is now. He wondered out loud, making sideways glances at Jiraiya, as if asking for permission to test something out. Jiraiya shrugged and smiled. Sure, go ahead kid. Might as well learn as much as we can about what this jutsu does in regards to your chakra capacity now, before you're forced to later in combat. Alright, here we go then, he shouted, before forming a hand seal and announcing, Shadow Clone Jutsu. The entire forest erupted into a plume of smoke, making Jiraiya's eyes widen in shock. Naruto, this is at least. At that moment, the fog cleared, revealing thousands of shadow clones, stretching for miles in all directions. Whoa, Naruto whispered. My limit used to be 400 or so. But this is. How many clones did you summon, Naruto? Gaped Jiraiya. Well, I do what I always do, and think of 10,000. That always maxes me out, and I feel a significant strain. But right now, 10,000? Kid, that's the most shadow clones one person has ever summoned, shouted Jiraiya. Naruto smiled. And I know for a fact I can still make more. I just have to think bigger. Then, he got a devilish idea. He weaved a few more hand signs. And I still have the power to do this. Jutsu. There was another cloud of smoke, which revealed hundreds upon hundreds of scantily clad women, all batting their eyes and blowing kisses at Jiraiya. Each clone from before had transformed into an almost naked woman, complete with Naruto's signature blonde hair and whisker marks. That idiot, Sakura shouted, as Jiraiya's bloodied nose propelled him into the sky. Kakashi quickly thanked the gods that he wore a face mask and kept most of his face covered, otherwise he'd have to explain the blush and his own slight nosebleed to the Chunin. "Oh, well, if it works, it works." He hastily remarked with an eye smile. Shikamaru rolled his eyes and smiled. "It certainly seems to have an effect on Master Jiraiya, at least." The next memory faded indirectly over the previous. Naruto jerked awake inside of his tent, panting heavily and sweating profusely. After regaining his composure and looking around a little bit, he decided it would be best to stand outside and get some fresh air to try to calm his nerves. When he unzipped the tent and stepped out into the cool summer night, he sighed with relief, before stretching a little bit and putting on his mesh undershirt. He had just had a nightmare, one that didn't really make much sense, but terrified him nonetheless. It was one of those nightmares that you forget immediately upon waking up, and Naruto cursed to himself that he would get so worked up over a bad dream. But something about this dream was worse than any of the others that he'd ever had. It was gut-wrenchingly horrible. At least, that's what he could remember of it. After walking around their campsite a few times and thinking to himself, he stepped out into the moonlit clearing that bordered their tenting area. What he saw shocked him. His skin was very, very pale, even that much was obvious in the dim moonlight. In addition to being chalky white, his arms had begun to sag slightly, almost as if he was aging at an accelerated rate. His fingernails had begun to darken as well. "The way my fingernails look seems familiar," he thought to himself, before looking closer. Suddenly, it hit him. "Wait, this is what happens to my hands whenever I use the Nine-Tails cloak." Gulping, he rushed towards the small stream that ran through the clearing. He threw himself down, and leaned over the edge, attempting to see his reflection. Staring back at him were a pair of crimson-red eyes, not unlike the color his eyes became whenever he got extremely angry or agitated. The pupils were slitted, and were blacker than the night sky. He pulled back his gums, in order to get a better look at his teeth. Sure enough, his canines had grown significantly, and his teeth in general looked sharpened and deadly. Naruto sat back, and stared off into the water in front of him as it reflected the subtle outlines of the moonlit trees. "Why is this happening to me? I don't understand. I'm not angry, and there's no reason for me to be in this state right now. I also don't have the red chakra cloak right now. This doesn't make any sense." Suddenly, a deep feeling of dread overcame him. What if this has something to do with the seal the pervy sage put on me this morning? He lifted up his shirt, and channeled a little chakra down to his toes, which ran through the seal and allowed it to surface on his skin. He panicked a little when he noticed it was glowing. Normally, his seal was hidden until he channeled chakra in his body, and when it appeared, it was black and unmoving. Naruto took a closer look at the seal. In place as always was the 8 trigram seal the 4th Hokage had placed on him on the day of his birth. But now, there was a small ring of symbols and lettering that circled it. And the 8 trigram seal was glowing inside the ring. Fear quickly came rushing back. What if the Nine-Tails is trying to break free? Is that why I suddenly look like this? I don't understand. Naruto though about what Jiraiya might say if he saw this. He'd probably blame me for it. I must be doing something wrong. Then he'll end up punishing me for ruining his seal and all his hard work. Naruto frowned a little. It's not like it's really all that noticeable. I mean, I'm still me. I still feel the same. It would probably be a good idea not to tell him about this until something happens. Something tells me that was a mistake, a huge mistake, murmured Shikamaru. That troublesome idiot. Why wouldn't he tell Master Jiraiya the seal was acting up? Actually, Naruto thought to himself with a grin, I feel pretty great. I can probably train for much longer now. So maybe this is supposed to be happening. Then, he got an idea. I wonder. Naruto closed his eyes, grunted, and began channeling his chakra around the seal. This always worked before. I hope it'll work now. After holding it for a few seconds, the chakra was absorbed by the seal, and Naruto let out a sigh of relief. He looked back down at his reflection, and saw that his eyes had gone back to their vibrant sky blue hue. His pupil was round and the way it should be. His teeth were still a little long, but not much more than usual. With a smile, he stood up, and dusted himself off. That's when he noticed his hands. His fingernails were still long and claw-like. Ah, what the hell? He yelled inside of his head. Are they just gonna stay like that forever now? He sighed, and admitted defeat. Well, the old pervert is gonna notice this, so I'd better wrap them up with bandages. He'd have to come up with an excuse for his pale skin, too, but he'd have to think about that later. Besides, he wore a long-sleeve jacket all the time. Who was going to see? Kakashi put his head in his hands. Oh, Naruto? Why didn't he say anything to Jiraiya? Sakura began to get frustrated. That idiot. He never stops to think about his own well-being. Naruto headed back to bed, and the memory began to fade again. The next one began abruptly to Jiraiya shaking his tent vigorously from the outside. Oi, get up, kid. We've got a long day of big ball Rasengan training to work on today. Naruto sat up immediately and looked around. His tent was lit with the warm glow of the morning sun, and he could hear the vibrant sounds of nature all around him. It was the next morning already. He blinked a few times and rubbed his eyes. Maybe I was just dreaming? He got his answer when he looked down at his hands and saw the clawed fingernails. I guess that answers that question. Hey, get up, bellowed the toad sage from outside. Alright, grumbled Naruto. He quickly took out a kunai from his pouch, whittled down his nails so they wouldn't puncture through the bandages, and quickly wrapped his hands before getting dressed and stepping out into the morning light. Jiraiya had turned slightly, and was jotting down notes in a small leather book. He paused when he saw Naruto step out and seal his tent away, then raised an eyebrow when he saw his hands. What's the deal with the bandages? Naruto jumped slightly. He knew his master would pick up on it almost immediately, but it still surprised him how little time it took. Regardless, he had mentally rehearsed what he was going to say already, and it took little time for him to blurt it out. I burned my hand a little bit when making all those giant Rasengan yesterday. I'll just have to be more careful today when I train, he quipped, quickly adding a smile at the end. Jiraiya stared at him with a quizzical look on his face for a moment, then sighed and smiled. I told you not to overwork yourself. Now look at what you've done. He turned around and started walking. Come on, we have a little under 3 hours until we reach the next village. The memory seemed to get hazy for a moment, as they departed the campsite and rejoined the main trail again. After a few moments of blurriness, Sakura was about to mention something to Kakashi, when the memory suddenly snapped back into focus. Naruto and Jiraiya were still walking, each maintaining the comfortable silence. The trees on either side of the cleared gravel path seemed to go on for as far as the eye could see, and the sun was now high in the sky. Suddenly, Naruto felt a sharp pain in the back of his head. It startled him, and he stopped for a second, but he quickly got used to the pain and continued walking. Must be because I didn't get very much sleep last night, he thought to himself, before yawning quietly. The two kept walking. Naruto had almost forgotten about the pain from before when suddenly it skyrocketed, like someone had stabbed a kunai through the back of his head and into his brain. Ah! He grasped the back of his head with his bandaged hands, and fell over in a dizzied haze. The pain was getting worse by the second, worse by the moment, and it was unbearable. Jiraiya immediately turned around, kunai drawn, expecting some sort of ambush. Instead, he saw his student doubled over on the trail, breathing erratically, and clutching at the back of his neck. A stifled moan would leak out of his mouth every few seconds. Suddenly, he stopped completely and started shaking. What's happening? He thought to himself in a panic. I hate that bastard. He's always coming by my stall and stealing my produce. One of these days he's gonna get what's coming to him. I can't believe he'd cheat on me with that whore of a woman. How dare he? My father doesn't understand me. No one understands me. I hate them all. They all should die. Naruto gasped, his eyes shooting open. He was laying in the fetal position now, with Jiraiya standing over him with a genuinely scared expression on his face. Stop talking. He screamed at Jiraiya. I can't. He began hyperventilating, as another wave of voices began to wash over him. Those shinobi bastards. They come through here every week and think they're all high and mighty. They're despicable. My son is a failure. I can't believe he can't even perform a simple henge jutsu. He's going to grow up as some worthless. Naruto snapped out of it long enough to notice Jiraiya holding him by the shoulders and shaking him around. What happened? You tell me. You had me really worried. What was that all about? Are you okay? Naruto blinked a few times. Where'd all those people go? Jiraiya looked around. What people? We haven't seen another soul for miles. Naruto shook his head. I could hear so many voices. They were all angry, all so angry, he began to shudder, as if a cold breeze had passed over him. Naruto, are you okay? Naruto? Jiraiya leaned down and looked him in the eye. Then he jumped back. Naruto, are you feeling okay? Your eyes, they're red? The boy sat up slightly, and his eyes returned to their normal blue color. Yeah, I'm feeling fine now. That was very weird. Don't scare me like that. And I think it probably has something to do with that seal I gave you yesterday. I need to look it over to make sure everything is okay. He looked at Naruto authoritatively. Okay, he said quietly, and lifted up his shirt. Jiraiya stared at it for a few moments, studying the seal quietly and inspecting it for any problems. After a few moments, he shook his head, and looked up at the boy. Well, I don't see anything wrong with it. So it's not the seal. Can you think of anything that might be making you hallucinate recently? Any changes in strength or energy? Naruto shook his head slightly. Well, I haven't been sleeping well the last few nights. And I have been training pretty hard. He held up his bandaged hands, as if to prove a point. Jiraiya chuckled. Well, alright then. You need to take it easier for the next few days. Just until you start to feel better. Okay? Naruto nodded and stood up. He stumbled a little bit, but the dizziness from getting up too quickly soon passed, and they continued on their way. Naruto didn't bother mentioning that he could still hear voices, although they were much quieter now. Like a whisper, Shikamaru grunted a little, and the memories began to fade. Sorry guys, that's my limit. I'm all out of chakra. Kakashi smiled, and began to assemble his books into a pile in front of him. That's alright, you too. It's already getting pretty late. He nodded towards the windows, which were growing darker and darker with each second, as the Hidden Leaf village was plunged into twilight. Whoa, how long were we sitting here? Mumbled Sakura, rubbing her eyes. Judging by how sore I am right now, a long time, grimaced Shikamaru, as he fidgeted in his seat. My mom is probably gonna kill me for sitting around all day. Well, we weren't exactly just sitting around, Kakashi noted, pointing at the page of the Icha book he had been jotting down notes in. It was completely covered. He had even begun to write on the first few pages, between the lines of the book itself. There was a lot of information to go through. Yeah, and there's still more to sift through, said Shikamaru, as he looked at the seal on the book in front of him. We probably have another few hours ahead of us, at least. Well then, let's not waste any time, Kakashi smiled. Let's meet up here first thing in the morning and keep gathering information. The more we are able to get from these seals, the better our chances of the retrieval squad being successful. The two Chunin nodded, and began packing up their belongings. Kakashi took the leather-bound notebook and put it away in his vest for safekeeping, before gathering up his Icha collection in his arms and standing up. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm famished. How does barbecue sound? Might treat. Yeah, you always say that. But then you bail before the check comes, sweat dropped Sakura. But I don't care. I'm starving. I could eat a horse. And so, the three of them departed the library, as they mentally processed everything they had just seen. Kyuubi approached the large stone statue with a grin on his face. Well. It took you long enough, chastised Kisame with a grin. What have you been doing all day, kid? The boy threw down two bodies, and they fell to the floor with a thump. The 8 tails and the 2 tails, as promised. And in under 8 hours, smiled Kyuubi. Impressive, muttered Itachi, as he watched the boy join the rest of the Akatsuki on the outstretched fingers of the Gedo statue. Nicely done, Kyuubi. We will now begin the sealing of both the 2 tails and the 8 tails. Prepare for a 3-day sealing jutsu, came the powerful voice of the purple-eyed one. Whoa, 3 days? Gak Hidan. What the hell? I thought these ceremonies only took 1 day. Kyuubi sighed, and looked at the white-haired man. I'm not going to be able to make quite the same, significant contribution to the sealing jutsu this time, he stated, before holding his hands out. They were tattered and torn, and the 9 tails chakra was poking out from each gash, although not as vibrantly as before. Destroying the hidden cloud and having to do so while working around this seal, was, well, rather troublesome, he grinned. Regardless, the sealing will take significantly shorter with Kyuubi here, even at his reduced strength, for the time being, said Pain, also looking at Hidan. Unless you'd like to spend the next week on each of these Jinchuriki. Hidan paled, and shook his head vehemently. I'll take what I can get, I guess. But damn, at least let me go to the bathroom first. Silence. We will now begin the sealing, barked the leader, as he weaved a dozen or so hand signs in quick succession.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.